Hello everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Joshua Millwright, and I've been a park ranger in West Virginia for 14 years. I'm telling you this story because what happened to me in Devil's Backbone Ridge changed everything I thought I knew about these mountains. I grew up here in Appalachia, third generation. My grandfather worked the coal mines until his lungs gave out, and my daddy taught me these hills like the back of my hand. I married my high school sweetheart, Helen, and we got 2 boys. Tommy's 8, and little Jake just turned 6. Been living the American dream, I suppose, until that October day in 1967 when everything went sideways. See, I never believed in the old stories. You know the ones, things that go bump in the night, creatures in the deep hollows, spirits that ain't supposed to be walking around. My grandmother used to tell tales about things in the mountains that would make your hair stand up. But I figured they were just stories to keep kids from wandering off. I specialized in search and rescue operations. In 14 years, I'd brought back 47 lost souls, and I was proud of that record. When folks got turned around in these woods, or when hunters didn't come home when they were supposed to, they called me. I knew every trail, every cave, every creek in 100 square miles of Monongahela National Forest. It was a Thursday morning when the call came in. Donald Fleming had been camping with his wife Sarah and their 2 kids, Linda, age 12, and Bobby, just 10 years old. They'd been missing for 3 days. Fleming had driven down to the ranger station in his old pickup truck, hat in his hands, looking like he hadn't slept since they disappeared. I went to get supplies, he told me, voice shaking. Left them at the campsite for maybe 4 hours. When I got back, they were just gone. The temperature was dropping fast that week. Early frost warnings were out, and nighttime lows were hitting near freezing. A family lost in these conditions wouldn't last long, especially not kids. I loaded up my gear, radio, first aid kit, emergency supplies, and my trusty compass that had never steered me wrong. Pete Atwood, another ranger, was assigned as my backup. Pete was younger than me, maybe 25, but he was solid and knew the woods. We drove out to Devil's Backbone Ridge in the Park Service truck. The name alone should have warned me. Local Cherokee had avoided that area for generations, though I didn't know why back then. As we bounced along the dirt road, I noticed things were quieter than usual. No birdsong, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects seemed to have gone silent. "You notice how still it is out here?" Pete asked, rolling down his window. I had noticed, but I figured it was just the weather. Animals tend to hunker down when a cold front moves through. We parked at the trailhead and checked our radios. Standard procedure called for check-ins every 30 minutes. Threats. The Fleming campsite was about 3 miles in, following an old hunting trail that wound through thick rhododendron bushes and around massive oak trees that had been standing since before the Civil War. This part of the forest felt different somehow, older, darker, like the sunlight had trouble reaching the ground. When we found their camp, my stomach dropped. Everything was still there. Coffee pot sitting on the fire ring with coffee still in it, though the fire had burned down to cold ashes. Sleeping bags were laid out neat and tidy, but clearly hadn't been slept in. The kids' toys were scattered around the camp in a perfect spiral pattern, which struck me as odd. "That's strange," Pete said, pointing to the toy arrangement. "Kids don't usually organize their stuff like that." Forehead, I knelt down and touched the coffee pot. Still warm, my blood ran cold. If the family had been missing for 3 days, how could the coffee still be warm? "Pete, something's not right here." It's when I noticed the temperature. Even though the sun was shining through the trees, it felt like someone had opened a giant freezer. The air was so cold I could see my breath, but my thermometer read 60 degrees just an hour ago. I pulled out my compass to get our bearings, and the needle started spinning like a toy top. Round and round it went, never settling on any direction. I tapped it, thinking maybe it was broken, but it kept spinning. "My compass is going crazy," I called to Pete. He checked his too. Same thing, both compasses spinning like they couldn't figure out which way was north. That's when we heard it. A child's voice, thin and scared, coming from deeper in the woods. "Daddy, Daddy, help us!" I'd recognize it anywhere from when Fleming brought the family to last year's Ranger Safety presentation. But the voice was coming from a place where no child should be, a hollow that dropped down into a limestone cave system locals called the Devil's Throat. "Did you hear that?" I asked Pete, but he was already nodding, his face pale. The voice came again, weaker this time. "Please, Daddy, we're so cold." Every instinct I had as a ranger and as a father told me to run toward that voice. But 14 years of experience had taught me to think before acting. I tried the radio. Suppressing static. Nothing but crackling static, and what sounded almost like screaming? Far away and mixed in with the white noise, but definitely human voices in distress. "Radio's dead," I told Pete. "Must be the terrain." But I knew this area. I'd used radios here before with no problems. This was different. We followed the sound of Linda's voice down into the hollow. The trees grew thicker as we descended, and the temperature kept dropping. Soon we were walking through patches of frost, which was impossible given the weather forecast. "Look at this," Pete called out. He was pointing at the ground near a massive dead oak tree. Footprints in the soft earth, but not normal ones. These were huge, maybe 15 inches long, and shaped like human feet, but with claw marks at the toes. The prints were deep, like whatever made them was carrying a lot of weight. I knelt down for a closer look. The edges of the prints were sharp and fresh. Whatever made them had passed through recently. And there was something else. Droplets of what looked like blood leading from the prints toward a dark opening in the hillside. "Cave entrance," I said. "Limestone formations are common in this area." Linda's voice echoed from inside the cave. "Daddy, we're in here. It's so dark." I checked my flashlight. Fresh batteries that morning, but the beam was dim and yellow instead of bright white. Pete's was doing the same thing. "We should wait for backup," Pete said, but his voice was uncertain. "Those kids have been missing 3 days," I replied. "If they're in that cave, they won't last another night." The cave entrance was narrow, just wide enough for one person. As we squeezed through, the temperature dropped another 20 degrees. Our breath came out in thick clouds. The cave opened into a larger passage. Our footsteps echoed strangely, like the sound was being stretched and twisted. The walls were covered in scratch marks, deep gouges in the limestone that would have taken incredible strength to make. "What kind of animal could do that?" Pete whispered. I ran my fingers along the gouges. They were fresh, with limestone dust still crumbling from the edges. And they were too high up, 12 feet off the ground at least. We followed the passage deeper, guided by the blood trail and the occasional echo of children crying. But something was wrong with the echoes. Sometimes the voices seemed to come from ahead of us, sometimes from behind, sometimes from above. That's when we found the first piece of evidence. Sarah Fleming's red jacket, torn and bloody, hanging from a rock formation like someone had placed it there deliberately. "Mrs. Fleming!" I called out. No answer except our own voices bouncing back at us. Pete picked up the jacket with the tip of his flashlight beam. "Josh, look at this." The tears in the fabric weren't from catching on rocks. They were clean cuts, like from razor-sharp claws. And the blood was fresh, still damp. My flashlight started flickering. I banged it with my palm, but it kept dimming. Pete's went out completely. "We need to get out of here," he said. "Something's very wrong." But as we turned to go back, we realized we had a problem. The passage behind us looked different. Where there had been one tunnel, now there seemed to be 3. The cave system was bigger than we thought, with multiple passages branching off in different directions. "Which way did we come from?" Pete asked. I couldn't tell. In the dim light, all the passages looked the same. That's when we heard it. Not the children's voices this time, but something else. A sound like someone chewing, mixed with the crack of breaking bones. It was coming from deeper in the cave system. "What is that?" Pete whispered. Before I could answer, we heard Donald Fleming's voice echoing through the caves. But it was wrong somehow. Too deep, too hollow, like it was being spoken through a tube. "Boys, down here! I found them! They're hurt bad, but they're alive!" Relief flooded through me. We'd found them. But as we moved toward Fleming's voice, Pete grabbed my arm. "Josh," he said quietly, "didn't Fleming say he was at the ranger station when we left? How did he get here?" Penetration hit me like a punch to the gut. Fleming was still back at headquarters, filing the missing persons report. He couldn't be down here in these caves. So whose voice were we following? The chewing sounds grew louder, and Fleming's voice called out again. "Hurry up, boys, Sarah's bleeding pretty bad." But now I could hear slurping quality that made my skin crawl. Blockchain gave one last flicker and went completely dark. In the absolute blackness of the cave, we heard breathing that wasn't our own. Deep, ragged, hungry breathing coming from somewhere very close by. We stood frozen, in complete darkness, listening to that horrible breathing. It was slow and deliberate, like whatever was making the sound was savoring the moment. "Pete," I whispered as quietly as I could, "do you still have matches?" After a tiny flame flared up as Pete lit a match. The light was weak, but it was enough to see that we were in a larger chamber now. The walls were covered with more of those deep scratch marks, and there were bones scattered on the ground. Old bones, yellowed with age. But what made my blood freeze was what I saw in the flickering light, just at the edge of the match's glow. A pale, impossibly thin arm disappearing around a corner. The arm was too long, with fingers that stretched like spider legs. The match burned down to Pete's fingers and went out. "Did you see that?" he breathed. Championships, before I could answer, we heard children laughing somewhere in the darkness. Not scared crying like before, but happy laughter, like kids playing in a backyard. It was the most wrong sound I'd ever heard in that cold, bone-filled cave. "Uncle Pete! Uncle Josh!" It was Bobby Fleming's voice. "Come play with us!" The voice was coming from a passage to our right. Pete lit another match, and we could see drawings on the walls, not cave paintings, but something carved deep into the rock. They showed stick figures, but the figures were eating other figures. Lots of them, Pete said, studying the carvings. Real old. As we moved deeper into the cave system, following the children's voices, I started noticing other things. Pieces of clothing hanging from rock formations, a hiking boot here, a torn shirt there. But the clothing looked like it came from different time periods. Some pieces looked modern, but others seemed much older. We found another chamber, this one bigger than the first. Our matches showed a horrifying sight, bones arranged in neat piles against the walls. Human bones. Skulls stacked like firewood, rib cages sorted by size. At the center of the room was something that looked like a throne, made entirely of human remains. "Jesus Christ," Pete whispered. "How many people died down here?" That's when we heard Donald Fleming's voice again, but now it was coming from right behind us. "Found you, boys," the voice said. "Been looking everywhere." We spun around, but there was no one there. Just darkness and the echo of that wet, hollow voice. Pete's hands were shaking as he lit another match. In the brief light, we saw more carvings on the walls. These weren't stick figures, though. These were detailed drawings of a creature. Tall, thin, with long arms and a mouth full of teeth. The creature in the drawings was feeding on human figures. "The kids aren't here," I said, the truth finally hitting me. They never were. "Then what have we been following?" Pete asked. His question was answered by a sound that came from everywhere at once. A noise like a dozen people trying to speak with their mouths full of food. The sound echoed off the cave walls and seemed to come from the ground itself. When it stopped, we heard a new voice. This one was clear and human, but it wasn't any of the Fleming family. "My name is Joshua Crane," the voice said. I've been waiting so long for company. The voice was coming from the throne of bones. As Pete lit another match, we could see a figure sitting there, tall, impossibly thin, with skin like old paper. It wore the rotted remains of clothes that might have been from the 1800s. "I came to these mountains in 1847, the creature said in a voice like breaking glass. Winter was harsh that year. Food ran out. Had to make difficult choices." The match went out, but the creature kept talking in the darkness. Started with the cattle, then the horses. But that wasn't enough. The hunger. Oh, the hunger was so strong. My wife understood. My children understood. They gave themselves willingly in the end. Pete tried to light another match, but his hands were shaking too badly. The matchbook fell to the cave floor. "But the hunger never stops," the creature continued. "Every few years it comes back, stronger each time, and I have to feed it." That's when I understood. The Fleming family hadn't gotten lost. They'd been taken, and we weren't here to rescue anyone. We were here to be the next meal. "Pete," I whispered, "we need to run, now." But when I reached for where Pete had been standing, my hand found empty air. Somehow, in the darkness, he had vanished. "FedEx? Pete?" I called out. His voice came from somewhere above me. "Josh, help me." I looked up into the darkness and heard a wet, tearing sound, followed by Pete's scream. Then something warm and sticky dripped onto my face. Blood. I ran blindly through the cave passages, my hands stretched out in front of me, feeling my way along the walls. Behind me, I could hear that horrible chewing sound again, along with Pete's voice getting weaker and weaker. "Josh, don't leave me, please." But I kept running. God help me, I kept running. Proliferation. I stumbled into another chamber, this one smaller than the others. My hands found what felt like bundles on the ground, soft bundles wrapped in cloth. I didn't want to know what they were, but I had to check. My fingers found small bones, a child's skull, tiny rib cages. These were the Fleming children, or what was left of them. Prejudice. I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps that echoed through the caves. And that voice, Joshua Crane's voice, getting closer. "Don't run!" he called out. "The hunger is easier if you don't fight it. Your friend learned that." I fumbled in my pocket for my emergency kit and found a small flashlight I'd forgotten about. It gave off just enough light to see that this chamber had only one way out, back the way I'd come. I was trapped. The footsteps stopped just outside the chamber. In the weak light of my small flashlight, I could see a shadow on the wall, the outline of something that stood nearly 9 feet tall, with arms that hung down to the ground. "You have children," Joshua Crane's voice said. "I can smell them on you. 2 boys. The younger one, he would be so tender." My blood turned to ice. How could this thing know about Tommy and Jake? "I've been watching your family for weeks," the creature continued, "learning about them. The older boy walks to school through the woods behind your house. The little one plays in your yard every evening after dinner." The shadow on the wall moved closer to the chamber entrance. "Bring them to me, Joshua Millwright. Bring them to the cave, and I'll make it quick. For all of you." "Never," I whispered. The creature laughed, a sound like breaking bones. "Then I'll come get them myself. And when I do, I'll make sure they understand that their daddy could have saved them, but chose not to." That's when I saw something else in the weak light. Drawings on the wall behind me that I hadn't noticed before. But these weren't like the others. These showed a man fighting the creature with what looked like a knife. The man was wearing what appeared to be Native American clothing. I looked closer and found something wedged into a crack in the rock. A small bundle wrapped in what might have been leather. Inside were objects I couldn't identify in the dim light, but one of them felt like a knife handle. "Cherokee," a new voice said from somewhere in the darkness. Not the creature's voice, but an older man speaking in accented English. "My great-grandfather bound that thing here in 1848. The binding is weakening. I spun around but saw no one. "Who's there?" I called out. "Joseph Running Bear," the voice replied. "I've been waiting for someone like you, someone who could finish what my ancestors started." Behind in the passage let out a roar of rage. "The old man is dead, has been for 20 years. Don't listen to ghosts, Millwright." But Joseph's voice continued, calm and strong. "The binding ritual requires blood and silver and the right words. Everything you need is in that bundle." I opened the leather wrapping with shaking hands. Inside was a knife with a silver blade, some kind of dried plants, and a piece of birch bark with symbols carved into it. "Cut your palm," Joseph's voice instructed. "Let the blood fall on the symbols while you speak the words I'll teach you." "This won't work," the creature screamed, and I heard it crashing into the chamber. "Nothing can stop the hunger." Blocking, a quaint, with the silver knife. The pain was sharp, but the blood that flowed seemed to glow in the weak light. As the drops fell onto the carved symbols, they began to shine with their own light. Joseph's voice guided me through words in a language I'd never heard before, but somehow I could speak them perfectly. As I chanted, the creature's screams grew louder and more desperate. "Ka no hida ani skaya," I repeated after Joseph. The words seemed to have power. I could feel energy flowing through me and into the cave itself. The creature burst into the chamber, and for the first time, I saw it fully. 9 feet of pale, stretched skin over bones that jutted out at wrong angles. Its mouth was full of yellowed teeth, some of them clearly human teeth that didn't belong. Its eyes were hollow sockets filled with red light. But as I continued the chant, the creature began to change. Its form started to waver, like heat rising from hot pavement. "Anizgaya Elohi," I spoke the final words. The cave filled with blinding light, and Joshua Crane's screams became something beyond human hearing. When the light faded, where the creature had stood was now a circle of stones with strange markings. "It is done," Joseph Running Bear's voice said, "but not destroyed, only bound again. The binding will hold for many years, but not forever." "What does that mean?" I asked the empty chamber. "It means you are now the guardian. You must watch for signs that the binding is weakening, and when the time comes, you must teach another to do what you have done." Pete's torn uniform was gone. Even the blood on the walls had disappeared. Only the circle of stones remained. As I found my way out of the cave system, I realized that my compass was working again. My radio crackled to life with voices from the ranger station asking for my location. When I emerged into daylight, a search team was already looking for Pete and me. I told them we'd gotten separated in the cave system and that there had been a collapse. Pete was officially listed as a cave-in victim. The Fleming family was never found. The official report said they had likely fallen into an underground river system and been swept away. But I knew the truth. That was 3 months ago, and everything has changed. I can't eat meat anymore. The smell of cooking beef or pork makes me violently sick. Helen thinks it's trauma from finding those bones in the cave, and maybe she's right, but it's deeper than that. Sometimes when I look at meat, all I can see are the small bones I found in that chamber. Blindness now, dreams in Cherokee, even though I don't know the language when I'm awake. In the dreams, I see other creatures bound in other places throughout these mountains, and I see other men and women like me, guardians watching over the binding sites, making sure nothing escapes. Joseph Running Bear came to visit me 2 weeks after the incident. Turns out he wasn't dead after all. That was his grandfather who died 20 years ago. Joseph is a Cherokee elder who lives on the reservation, and he's been watching the cave site for decades. "You did well," he told me over coffee in my kitchen, "but this is just the beginning." He explained that there are dozens of these entities throughout Appalachia, all bound by his ancestors in the 1800s, when settlers like Joshua Crane gave in to unnatural hungers. Most of the bindings are holding, but some are weakening as the modern world encroaches on sacred sites. "You're part of a network now," Joseph said. "Other rangers, other guardians. We keep watch. We keep the binding strong. And when necessary, We stop things that should not walk the earth. Helen filed for divorce last month. She says I've changed, become distant and cold. She's taking Tommy and Jake to live with her sister in Ohio. I tried to explain that I was protecting them by staying away. But how do you tell your wife that an ancient cannibal spirit threatened your children without sounding completely insane? Part is not being able to tell her the truth. Not being able to explain why I wake up screaming, why I can't touch meat, why I spend every free moment hiking back to Devil's Backbone Ridge to check on that circle of stones. Last week, I started training a younger ranger named Marcus Thompson. He doesn't know it yet, but I'm preparing him to take over when I'm too old to do this job. The binding will outlast my lifetime, but it won't hold forever. I've documented everything in a journal that I keep locked in my cabin. Maps of other binding sites, descriptions of warning signs, copies of the Cherokee rituals Joseph taught me. Someday, someone else will need this information. The cave entrance has been officially sealed with concrete and steel barriers. Signs warn of unstable geology and cave-in danger. But I know the real reason it's closed. Sometimes, late at night, I drive out there and listen. The binding is strong, but I can still hear scratching sounds from deep underground. And sometimes, very faintly, I hear Joshua Crane's voice calling out promises of hunger and threats against my family. The thing is still there, still aware, still waiting. I'm 47 years old now, but I feel much older. The encounter aged me in ways that have nothing to do with time. My hair went grey almost overnight, and I have lines on my face that weren't there before. Joseph says it's the cost of touching the supernatural world. It leaves marks that never fade. But I'll keep watching. I'll keep the binding strong. And I'll train others to do the same when I'm gone. Because if there's one thing I learned in those caves, it's that some hungers never die. They just wait for their chance to feed again. Hiking in West Virginia, especially in the remote hollows where the old maps show Cherokee burial grounds, pay attention to the signs. If the birds go quiet and your compass starts spinning, if you find bones arranged in patterns or hear voices calling from caves, don't investigate. Just walk away. Some places are meant to stay empty, and some things are meant to stay buried. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, when the wind is howling through the mountains, I wonder if the binding will hold. I wonder if Joshua Crane's hunger is growing stronger. I wonder if I'll be enough to stop it when the time comes. Because it's not a matter of if the binding will weaken, it's a matter of when. And I'll be waiting when it does. My name is Franklin Morehouse, and I've been a park ranger in the Cherokee National Forest for 11 years now. I love this job, the quiet mountains, the old stories, the way history sits heavy in these woods like morning fog. I have a PhD in Appalachian studies, but I chose the ranger life over teaching in some stuffy classroom. Out here, I can touch the past with my own hands. Seminated 1974, when everything changed. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the ridges in soft reds and golds. I was sitting in my office at the visitor center when the call came in. "Frank, we got a problem up on Croatoan Ridge," said my supervisor, Bill Henderson. His voice sounded tight. "Someone's been messing with the historical markers. Third report this week." Parents Croatoan Ridge wasn't a place most tourists visited. It was 12 miles from the nearest road, hidden deep in the forest, where an English settlement had tried to take root back in the 1590s. They'd failed, like so many others. The Cherokee had stories about that place, but they didn't like to talk about them. "What kind of damage are we looking at?" I asked, already reaching for my hiking gear. Markers knocked over, carved stones moved around. But here's the weird part. Folks are hearing things up there. Children singing old songs. Kids that ain't supposed to be there. I laughed a little. "Come on, Bill. Probably just some local kids playing pranks." "Maybe so. But Charlie Swimmer called this morning. You know he don't call unless it's serious." That stopped my laughing. Charlie Swimmer was a Cherokee elder, a medicine man respected throughout the community. If he was worried about something, it was worth paying attention to. Fireplace, I packed my gear and headed out. The hike to Croatoan Ridge took me through some of the prettiest country in Tennessee. Rolling hills covered in thick hardwood forest, crystal clear streams, and rock formations that looked like sleeping giants. But as I got closer to the ridge, something felt different. The birds weren't singing much. The air felt heavier somehow. Horizontal sight, I could see what Bill meant. The wooden markers that told visitors about the lost colony were scattered around like someone had kicked them over. But that wasn't the strangest part. The old foundation stones, some weighing hundreds of pounds, had been moved into a perfect circle. No way kids could have done that. I set up my camp and started documenting the damage. As the sun got lower, the forest around me grew quiet. Too quiet. I'd been in these woods thousands of times, but I'd never heard silence like this. Burnett, that's when I heard it. Flattened at first, coming from deeper in the trees. Children's voices, singing something that sounded old, really old. The melody was strange, unlike anything I'd heard before. It made my skin crawl. I followed the sound, my flashlight bleed dancing between the trees, always just ahead of me, always just out of reach. As I walked, I noticed things that made my throat tight. Flowers along the path were wilted black, like they'd been touched by frost. The temperature was dropping fast, too fast for a September evening. The singing stopped. I stood there in the sudden silence, my breath coming out in little white puffs. That couldn't be right. It had been 70 degrees when I started hiking. I made my way back to camp, but sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear that melody playing in my head. And I kept thinking about something Charlie Swimmer had told me years ago. Some places remember things, Frank, and some things don't want to be remembered. The next morning, I radioed for help. The site was bigger than our records showed, and I was going to need expert assistance. Dr. Patricia Holbrook arrived 3 days later with a truck full of archaeological equipment and a smile that could light up the forest. "Frank, good to see you again," she said, grabbing my hand in both of hers. We'd worked together on several historical sites over the years. Pat was the best archaeologist I knew, and one of the few people who understood why these old places mattered. "You picked an interesting site for me," she said, looking around at the scattered stones. "The ground-penetrating radar is picking up structures we never knew existed. There's a whole network of chambers under here." We spent the day mapping the site properly. Pat's equipment showed foundation walls extending much further than anyone had imagined. The original settlement had been 3 times larger than the history books said. But there were other things the radar showed too. Spaces that didn't make sense. Chambers that seemed to twist and turn in impossible directions. "Look at this," Pat said, pointing at her screen. "These underground areas, they're not random. They're arranged in patterns. Protective patterns, if I had to guess." Chapter afternoon, while Pat worked on the radar readings, I started digging around the foundation stones. About 3 feet down, I found something that made my hands shake. A small skeleton, clearly a child's, buried without ceremony in what looked like a hastily dug grave. Then another, and another. "Pat, you need to see this." She came over and knelt beside me. Her face went pale when she saw what I'd uncovered. These children, they weren't buried properly. No coffins, no grave goods, just thrown in the ground. Why would they do that? I don't know, but whatever happened here, it happened fast. "Look at this." She pointed to scratch marks on the bones. These children didn't die peacefully. As evening approached, we decided to stay overnight to document everything properly. Pat set up her equipment around the main foundation area while I made camp nearby. The sun disappeared behind the trees, and that unnatural quiet settled over the ridge again. That's when the temperature dropped, which I was talking to the chat, but returned the treat sofa stand. We can talk the formases with instance with his health. That's when the treat, by a future over the groom. That's when the concern was helping to the treats, which was now between the croom, and I was being part of the shows of the world. The guest was with her time, and the people who the protectedly heard with her britter world. But he took the temp, we defined individuals. That's when the temperature dropped again, which was a treat from the croom, and the faction cape in. The fought her to do, which was problem in the good court, in the fire, the right of the performance, but is not in the treat some of the croom, but is little different britter. She treat, which was cloused, and she short her. But the world was released with her resolved, the shows of the treat, to really supposed. That's when the temperature dropped again, which was now between the croom, and the faction cape in. The first was working to the treats, which was wandered for the groom, which was cloused between the treat to grow enough, but he showed with the treat somewhere. The beginning that werg, which was crieted for the ridge. That's when the temperature dropped again, which was making the real time of the ridge. That's when the temperature dropped again, which was working to the treats, to really supposed. It is discovered while the treat, to really supposed. Per treat was alls, to find 'em. That's when the temperature dropped. Jesus, what's with the cold? Pat asked, pulling her jacket tighter. It was 70 degrees 5 minutes ago. The answer came in the form of laughter, children's laughter, echoing through the trees like silver bells. But there was something wrong with it, something that made my stomach turn. Frank, do you hear that? Flushing for my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, and that's when we saw them. 3 children stood at the edge of our camp, a boy about 10 years old, and 2 girls who looked younger. They wore clothes that belonged in a history book, rough wool and linen, the kind of thing English colonists might have dressed their children in centuries ago. But these kids were pale, almost see-through, and their eyes were completely black. "Hello," the oldest girl said, her voice sweet and clear. "Are you here to play with us?" Pat grabbed my arm. "Frank, those are the children from the graves. I recognize the clothing fragments we found." The boy smiled, and his teeth looked too sharp. "We've been waiting such a long time for new friends. Won't you come play with us?" I stood up slowly, putting myself between Pat and the children. Something deep in my gut was screaming that these weren't children at all. Not anymore. "We don't want any trouble," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. The youngest girl giggled. "No trouble. We just want to show you our games. Our special games that we've been playing since the sickness took our parents." "What sickness?" Pat whispered. "The one that made us special," the boy said. "The one that made us hungry." The children started moving closer, and with each step, the temperature dropped another degree. My breath was coming out in thick white clouds now. Pat's equipment started sparking and crackling. "Come with us," the oldest girl said, reaching out her hand. "Come see where we live now. Come see what we've built in the dark places under the earth." When I grabbed Pat's hand and ran. We didn't stop running until we reached my truck, but when I tried to start it, nothing happened. The engine was dead, and ice had formed on the windshield. "This isn't possible," Pat kept saying. "This just isn't possible." I led her to a ranger station about 2 miles away, an old cabin I used for equipment storage. We barricaded ourselves inside and waited for dawn. Pat spent the night staring out the window, watching for movement in the trees. "They followed us," she whispered around 3 in the morning. "I can see them out there, just standing, watching." I looked where she was pointing, but I couldn't see anything. That scared me more than if I had seen them. When the sun came up, we hiked back to the site. Our equipment was still there, but it had been rearranged. Pat's radar unit had been moved directly over one of the underground chambers. The screen was still on, showing readings that made her gasp. "Frank, look at this. The chamber system is active. I'm reading movement down there, lots of movement." I stared at the screen. According to the readout, there were dozens of figures moving through the underground spaces, figures the size of children. "We need to get down there," Pat said. "We need to see what's really happening." Every instinct I had screamed against it, but I knew she was right. Whatever was going on, we needed answers. We found the entrance hidden behind a cluster of fallen stones, a narrow opening that led down into total darkness. Pat went first with the flashlights, while I followed with a rope and emergency supplies. The tunnel sloped downward for about 50 feet before opening into a chamber that took my breath away. The room was huge, carved from solid rock. The walls were covered in symbols I didn't recognize. Some looked Cherokee, others seemed European, and still others were completely alien. But what really got my attention were the toys. Turbulence of them. Dolls made from corn husks and cloth, wooden hoops, carved animals, marbles made from clay. They were arranged in neat little piles, like someone had just finished playing with them. And they looked fresh, like they'd been made yesterday instead of 400 years ago. Transporting. Pat, look at the walls. She swung her flashlight beam around, and we both saw them at the same time. Handprints. Hundreds of small handprints covering every surface. But these weren't ancient markings. The mud was still wet. "We need to leave," I said. "Right now." But when we turned to go, the children were there. All of them this time. Not just the 3 we'd seen before, but dozens of pale, black-eyed children in period clothes. They filled the tunnel entrance, blocking our way out. "You came to play," the boy said, his voice echoing strangely in the chamber. "We knew you would. Adults always do, eventually." Pat stepped forward, her scientific mind still working, despite the fear. "What happened to you? What happened to your parents?" The oldest girl smiled that terrible smile. "They got sick, just like you're going to get sick. The special sickness that makes you one of us." "What do you mean?" I asked. "The hunger," she said simply. "The need to feed, to take what keeps you warm and bright and alive. Our parents fed us for a while, but they got all used up. We've been so hungry since then, so very, very hungry." That's when I understood. These things, whatever they were now, had killed their own parents, drained them somehow, and they'd been waiting down here for centuries, looking for new food. Pardon Sant suddenly gasped and grabbed her throat. I can't breathe properly." Lend as I could see what was happening. The color was draining from her skin, and her breath was coming out in short, shallow puffs. The children were doing something to her, feeding on her somehow. "Stop it!" I shouted. "Blankets," the boy laughed. "We're just playing. Don't you want to play too?" I grabbed Pat and pulled her toward a side tunnel I'd noticed, one the children hadn't blocked yet. We ran through narrow passages carved from stone, Pat getting weaker with every step. Behind us I could hear the children singing that horrible old song, their voices echoing off the walls. The tunnel led to another chamber, smaller than the first. This one was different though. The walls were covered in Cherokee symbols, and there were items I recognized from tribal ceremonies: sage bundles, eagle feathers, carved totems. Someone had made this place into a shrine. Center of the room sat an old Cherokee man I'd never seen before. He was ancient, with long white hair and skin like weathered leather. He looked up at us with eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the mountains. "About time you got here," he said calmly. "I've been waiting." "Hugh?" I gasped, still holding on to Pat as she struggled to breathe. "Joseph Swimmer," he said, standing with more grace than his age should have allowed. "Charlie Swimmer's grandfather. I've been watching this place for longer than you've been alive." He moved to Pat and placed his hands on her forehead. She immediately took a deeper breath, some color returning to her cheeks. "The children," I said. "What are they?" Jeff's face grew grim. "Not children. Haven't been children for a very long time. They're something much older and hungrier. The English colonists didn't know what they were dealing with when they settled here. This was sacred ground, protected by our people for good reason. Perceived from what? From things that should stay buried, the spirits that live in the dark places between worlds. The colonists built their settlement right on top of one of our binding sites, broke the protections we'd maintained for generations. Pat was sitting up now, looking more like herself, but the children we found, they were real children once. Neutral nodded sadly. Yes, real children who got infected by what lived under this ground. The entities possessed them, used their innocent appearance to get close to the adults. Then they fed, drained the life from their parents, their neighbors, everyone in the settlement. "How do you know all this?" I asked. "Because my people were here. We watched it happen. We tried to help, but it was too late. The binding was broken, and those things were loose. All we could do was contain them again. Symbols in this room, a new binding place. We've been maintaining it ever since, keeping those things locked underground. But you archaeologists, with your digging and your equipment, you've been weakening the seals. They're almost free now." As if to prove his point, we heard the children's voices getting closer. Their song was louder now, more urgent. "What do they want?" Pat asked. Joseph's eyes were dark with old knowledge. To feed, to spread. They've been trapped down here for centuries, getting weaker, but now they have fresh life force to drain. They'll use you to get stronger. Then they'll go looking for more victims, more children to possess, more adults to feed on. The singing was right outside the chamber now. I could feel that unnatural cold seeping through the walls. "How do we stop them?" I asked. Joel pulled out items from a leather pouch: tobacco, sage, small carved stones. "The old way, Cherokee way, but it requires sacrifice. Someone has to stay behind to anchor the new binding. Someone has to feed their life force into the protective wards to make them strong enough to hold." Pat grabbed my arm. "No, there has to be another way." "Sometimes there isn't," Joseph said quietly. "Sometimes protecting others means giving up everything." Swallowing. Battlefield. In the chamber dropped to freezing. Ice began forming on the walls. The children's voices were right outside now, no longer singing but whispering our names. "Frank, Patricia, come out and play with us." Joseph started his ritual, spreading tobacco and lighting sage bundles. The smoke swirled around us, and I could feel power building in the air. Real power, old and deep as the mountains themselves. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll stay." But Pat shook her head. "No, this is my fault. My equipment, my digging that weakened the seals. It should be me." Scratching sounds, like fingernails on stone. The children were trying to claw their way in. Joseph looked at both of us. "Neither of you understands. The binding doesn't require death. It requires choice. Someone has to choose to become part of this place, to become its guardian, to stay connected to the protective wards for the rest of their life." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means whoever does this will be bound to this ridge forever. You'll age slower, live longer, but you can never leave for more than a few days at a time. Your life becomes about watching, protecting, making sure those things never break free again." The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. Then the wall exploded inward. The children poured through the opening like a black tide, their eyes burning with ancient hunger. But they weren't children anymore. They were something else, something with too many teeth and fingers that ended in claws. Joseph troops 3 sacred stones at them, shouting words in Cherokee that seemed to burn the air itself. The creatures shrieked and fell back, but only for a moment. "Choose!" Joseph yelled over their screaming. "Choose now!" I looked at Pat, saw the terror in her eyes, and made my decision. I choose to stay. The power hit me like lightning. The binding ritual felt like being torn apart and put back together again. I could feel my life force connecting to every tree, every stone, every blade of grass on Croatoan Ridge. The Cherokee protections flowed through me, became part of me. The creatures that had once been children screamed as they were pulled back into the deep places. The power was too strong for them now, fed by my willing sacrifice. They fought it, clawing at the air, but one by one they disappeared into the darkness under the earth. The last thing I saw before I passed out was the oldest girl's face, twisted with fury and hunger. "This isn't over," she hissed. "We'll find another way. We always do." Then, silence. I woke up 3 days later in a Cherokee National Forest hospital. Pat was sitting beside my bed, her hand in mine. "The official report says you suffered from exposure and exhaustion," she said quietly. Joseph Swimmer explained everything to his people, but the government, well, they have their own version of events. What version is that? Gas leak from old mining equipment caused hallucinations. The underground chambers were declared geologically unstable and permanently sealed. All artifacts have been moved to secure storage, which means they've disappeared into some government warehouse. I sat up carefully. I felt different, connected to something vast and patient and old. Even here in the hospital, I could feel Croatoan Ridge calling to me. "How long can I stay away?" I asked. Patriotism Pat's eyes filled with tears. "Joseph says a few days at most before you have to go back." "Frank, what did you do?" "What I had to do." She squeezed my hand. "I'm staying in the area. Got myself assigned to document Cherokee historical sites. Someone needs to help you watch." 6 months later, I was back at work as if nothing had happened. Officially. Unofficially, I'd become something else entirely. I could sense disturbances in the forest from miles away. I aged slower than normal people, and I could never leave the mountains for more than 3 days without feeling like I was dying. But I wasn't alone. Joseph Swimmer became my teacher, showing me the old ways of protection and binding. Pat visited often, bringing news from the outside world and helping document other sites that might be dangerous. And there were others. I learned that the government had a whole division dedicated to supernatural threats, hidden deep within the Department of the Interior. Rangers and researchers who'd made the same choice I had, scattered across the country, watching over places where the past refused to stay buried. The children of Croatoan Ridge stayed quiet for years. But sometimes, late at night, I could hear them down there in the deep places, singing their ancient songs, waiting for their chance. Because Joseph was right about one thing: this isn't over. It never really ends. There are too many dark places in these old mountains, too many forgotten settlements where terrible things happened. And something's been waking them up, coordinating them. While I've seen the reports from other sites, Roanoke Island, lost settlements in the Ozarks, failed colonies up and down the eastern seaboard, all showing signs of activity. The children aren't just waiting anymore, they're planning. And I'll be here when they make their move, along with all the other guardians who chose to stand between the darkness and the light. Because some things are worth sacrificing everything for. Some stories never really end. They just wait for the next chapter to begin. If you ever find yourself hiking in the Cherokee National Forest and you come across historical markers that seem out of place, or if you hear children singing in the woods where no children should be, remember this: some history is better left undisturbed. And if you see an older ranger who seems to know more about the mountains than anyone should, who moves through the forest like he belongs there more than among people, that might be me. Still watching. Still protecting. Stiffness, still keeping the children of Croatoan Ridge from finding new friends to play with. My name is Samuel Birchwood, and I've been a ranger at Daniel Boone National Forest for 17 years. I've pulled dead bodies out of caves, rappelled down cliff faces in thunderstorms, and once spent 3 days tracking a lost hiker through a blizzard. I thought I'd seen everything these Kentucky woods could throw at me. Was wrong. It started on a Tuesday morning in November 1983. The leaves had turned that deep amber colour that makes tourists drive up from Louisville with their cameras. I was sitting in my office, working through paperwork, when the call came in. "Sam, we got a problem." It was my supervisor, Jim Crawford. His voice had that tight edge that meant serious trouble. "Missing persons report. 4 college kids from UK, down in the cave system near Red River Gorge." I grabbed my gear bag. Cave rescues were my specialty, had been since I started working these hills. My daddy and his daddy before him had been rangers here, and they'd taught me every tunnel and crack in the limestone. "Been missing?" I asked, loading my truck. 3 days. geology students doing some kind of research project. Last radio contact was Sunday night. That made my stomach twist. 3 days in those caves meant hypothermia, dehydration, or worse. The cave systems around Red River Gorge were like a maze underground. Easy to get lost, easier to get hurt. I drove out to the cave entrance they'd been exploring. It was one I knew well. We called it Morrison Cave, after the family that used to own the land. The students' cars were still parked at the trailhead. Their equipment was laid out neat and organized near the cave mouth, like they'd just stepped inside for a quick look. That's when I noticed something odd. Their rope was still anchored at the entrance, disappearing down into the darkness. But it was tied in knots I'd never seen before. Complex, twisted things that looked almost decorative. No caver I knew tied knots like that. Plausible. I called down into the cave. "Hello? UK geology team, can anyone hear me?" My voice echoed back, but there was something wrong with the echo. It sounded like it was coming from too far away, like the cave was much deeper than I remembered. I checked my gear one more time. Headlamp, backup light, rope, first aid kit, radio, everything a cave rescue required. I'd done this hundreds of times. But as I started down into Morrison Cave that morning, something felt different. The air was too cold for November. The limestone walls looked wrong somehow, like they'd been scratched or carved. And there was a smell. Not the usual cave smell of damp earth and bat droppings. This was something else. Something old. I called Jim on my radio. "Base, this is Birchwood. I'm going down. Cave entrance shows signs of unusual activity. Send backup in 2 hours if you don't hear from me." "Kinemise, copy that, Sam. Be careful down there." I hooked my rope to the anchor point and started my descent. The familiar weight of my gear felt comforting as I dropped into the darkness. My headlamp beam cut through the black, showing the rough limestone walls and the narrow passage ahead. After about 50 feet, the cave opened into a chamber I'd explored dozens of times before. Except it looked different now. Bigger. The ceiling seemed to stretch higher than my light could reach, and passages led off in directions that shouldn't have existed. That's when I heard it. Congressional. A voice. Soft, like a woman humming. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the walls in a way that made my skin crawl. Play back and listened hard. Just the drip of water and the sound of my own breathing. But I could swear I'd heard something. Discriminate. "Hello?" I called out. "UK geology team?" Came again, clearer this time. Definitely a woman's voice, but the tune was old-fashioned, like something my grandmother might have sung. It was coming from deeper in the cave. I checked my compass. The needle was spinning slowly, like it couldn't decide which way was north. I tapped it, thinking maybe I damaged it on the way down, but it kept spinning. Behind the sudden silence, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Scratching sounds, like fingernails dragging across stone. They seemed to come from all around me, from the walls themselves. I swept my light across the chamber, looking for the source. The scratching stopped. On the wall directly in front of me, carved deep into the limestone, were fresh letters. They looked like they'd been scratched there moments before. "Tell old Jack Bell his time has come." I stared at those words, my mind racing. Jack Bell was my grandfather's name. He died 15 years ago. Nobody called him Jack except family, and nobody alive knew he'd once explored these caves as a young man. The temperature in the cave suddenly dropped. I could see my breath in the beam of my headlamp. Ice crystals started forming on the walls, which was impossible 60 feet underground in November. That's when I decided to call for backup. I keyed my radio, but all I got was static. The signal should have been strong this close to the entrance, but something was interfering. I tried again, adjusting the frequency, but nothing came through except white noise that sounded almost like whispering. I decided to continue the search. 4 kids were down here somewhere, and whatever was happening to me, they were probably experiencing it too, maybe worse. the largest passage leading deeper into the cave. My rope played out behind me as I moved carefully through the tunnel. The walls here were covered in scratches, not random marks, but deliberate patterns, almost like writing, but in no language I recognized. The passage opened into another chamber, this one smaller and more familiar. I'd been here before during training exercises, but something was different.
In the center of the room, where there used to be a small pile of rocks, someone had built a careful arrangement of stones. They formed a perfect circle, with strange symbols scratched into each rock. Inside the circle were 4 backpacks, modern ones, with University of Kentucky patches. I approached carefully, my light sweeping the area for any sign of the students. The backpacks were arranged neatly, like someone had placed them there on purpose. I opened the nearest one and found a wallet with a student ID. Jenny Morrison, age 20, geology major. Her notebook was still inside, filled with careful drawings of rock formations and cave maps. But the last few pages were different. The writing got more frantic, the letters bigger and shakier. I read the final entry by the light of my headlamp. November 13, day. Can't find the way out. Passages keep changing. Sarah swears the tunnel we came through isn't there anymore. Mike is talking to himself, says he can hear his dead sister calling him. The scratching sounds won't stop. Something is in here with us. Something that knows our names. The voice is getting stronger. It knows things about us. Personal things. It told Sarah about her father's drinking problem. It told Mike about the accident he never told anyone about. It's learning from us. Going to try the Eastern Passage. If anyone finds this, don't come looking for us. Get out while you can. Tell our families we love them. Kate is calling again. She wants to teach us something. She says we're special. Notebook slipped from my hands as I read that name. Kate. My grandfather used to tell stories about the Bell Witch, an old Kentucky legend from the 1800s about a spirit that tormented a family in Robertson County. The witch's name was Kate, but that was just a story, a legend. The humming started again, closer this time. It was coming from a passage I hadn't noticed before, one that definitely hadn't been there on my previous visits to this chamber. My compass was still spinning wildly, and now my watch had stopped working too. Followed the chants deeper into the cave. The passage was narrow, forcing me to crawl in some places. My headlamp illuminated scratch marks on every surface, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. They seemed to shift and move in my peripheral vision. After what felt like an hour of crawling, the passage opened into the largest chamber I'd ever seen in this cave system. It was huge, cathedral-sized, with formations that shouldn't have existed, according to any geological survey I'd ever read. The chamber, I found 3 of the students. They were sitting in a circle, perfectly still, their eyes closed. For a moment I thought they were dead, but then I saw they were breathing. Slow, deep breaths, like they were sleeping. "Hey!" I called out, rushing toward them. "Can you hear me?" None of them responded. I knelt beside the first one, a young man with dark hair. His skin was cold to the touch, but he had a steady pulse. I checked his pupils with my penlight. They were dilated and unresponsive. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The 3 students looked older, much older. Their hair was streaked with grey, and their faces were lined with wrinkles. These were supposed to be 20-year-old college kids, but they looked like they'd aged decades. I checked the other 2, same thing, aged beyond recognition, but breathing steadily. "What happened to you?" I whispered. That's when she answered me. "They learned," said a voice right behind my ear. I spun around, my light cutting through the darkness, but there was no one there. "Absorbs the secrets of the deep places," the voice continued. It was definitely a woman's voice, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Old-fashioned, like the humming had been. "Just like you're going to learn, Samuel Birchwood." The voice knew my name. "Who are you?" I called out. "Where's the 4th student?" Laughter echoed through the chamber, coming from everywhere at once. "Oh, Samuel, your grandfather told you about me, didn't he? Old Jack Bell knew exactly who I was." My blood ran cold. My grandfather's name was Jack Birchwood, not Bell. But his mother had been a Bell before she married.
It was a connection I'd never thought about. "Kate," I whispered. "Very good," the voice purred. "Kate Batts, the Bell Witch. Though I've learned so much since those simple days in Robertson County, I've grown stronger, hungrier." Rocks began to rain down from the ceiling. I covered my head and looked up, but I could see the stones appearing out of thin air, materializing in mid-fall. They struck the ground around me in a perfect circle, never touching me but trapping me in place. "The fourth student?" Kate's voice was amused now. "Jenny Morrison? She's special. She volunteered to be my voice in your world. She's helping me learn about your modern times." Tyler students began to stir, their eyes opening slowly. But when they looked at me, their expressions were empty, hollow. "They served their purpose," Kate said. "But you, Samuel, your family. Bell family blood runs in your veins. You're much more useful to me." The students stood up in unison, moving like puppets on strings. They began to walk toward me, their aged faces blank and emotionless. I grabbed my radio and tried one more time to call for backup. This time, instead of static, I heard Kate's laughter coming through the speaker. "No one's coming to help you, Samuel. This is between family now." I backed away from the approaching students, my mind racing. The aged geology majors moved with jerky, unnatural steps, like marionettes controlled by an amateur puppeteer. Their eyes were completely white now, no iris or pupil visible. I demanded. Kate's laughter filled the chamber. "I gave them what they wanted. Knowledge. They came here seeking secrets of the earth, and I showed them truths that mortal minds aren't meant to hold. The knowledge aged them, consumed them from inside." I reached the wall of the chamber and could retreat no further. The three students stopped just a few feet away, swaying slightly, their mouths opened in unison. "Join us, Samuel," they said in Kate's voice. "Your bloodline makes you perfect. The Bell family always had potential for the supernatural." "I'm not a Bell," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My name is Birchwood." "Names change," Kate replied through the students. "Blood doesn't. Your great-great-grandmother was Elizabeth Bell, sister to old John Bell himself, the one I tormented so deliciously in Tennessee. You have the gift, Samuel, the ability to bridge the world of the living and the dead." Perpendicular. The students raised their hands toward me, and I felt something pulling at my mind. Images flashed before my eyes, scenes from the 1800s, a farmhouse in Tennessee, a family cowering in terror as an invisible force threw furniture and whispered threats. But these weren't just stories. I was seeing them through Kate's eyes, feeling her satisfaction as she terrorized the Bell family. I was experiencing her memories. "You see?" Kate whispered in my mind. "You can touch my realm already. With proper guidance, you could become so much more." I fought against the visions, focusing on the present. My training kicked in. I was a rescue ranger. My job was to get these people out alive. "Where's Jenny Morrison?" I asked, while the students' heads turned toward a passage I hadn't noticed before. It was behind a formation of flowstone that definitely hadn't been there when I entered the chamber. "She's becoming," they said in unison, "transforming. Soon she'll be able to walk in your world as my avatar." Undecided, out my emergency flare and lit it. The red light filled the chamber, and the students stepped back, hissing like cats. Apparently, Kate's control had limitations. I moved toward the new passage, holding the flare high. The students followed but kept their distance, like vampires avoiding sunlight. Passage was narrow and led steadily downward. The walls here were covered in what looked like Cherokee petroglyphs, but they were moving, shifting in the flickering light of my flare. Some showed human figures. Others depicted a massive shadow with reaching arms. I could hear Jenny Morrison before I saw her. She was singing, the same old-fashioned tune I'd heard Kate humming, but in a young woman's voice. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The passage opened into a smaller chamber, and there she was. Jenny Morrison sat cross-legged in the center of the room, but she looked wrong. Her skin was pale as milk, almost translucent, and I could see dark veins underneath like a spider web. Her blonde hair had turned white, and her eyes were solid black. She was holding something in her hands, a small stone covered in symbols. As she sang, the symbols glowed with a cold blue light. "Jenny?" I called softly. She stopped singing and looked up at me. When she smiled, her teeth were sharp and pointed. "Hello, Cousin Samuel," she said in Kate's voice. Jenny was kind enough to lend me her body. She's still in here, screaming. Would you like to hear her? Contorted, and suddenly she spoke in her own voice, young and terrified. "Help me! She's inside my head! She won't let me!" Kate's personality slammed back into control. "Quiet, child. Adults are talking." I held up the flare. "Let her go." "Oh, I don't think so. Jenny Morrison has a very special gift. She can channel spiritual energy through her living body."
It took me weeks to find someone with a proper sensitivity. Her grandmother was Cherokee, you see. Indigenous bloodlines often carry the old gifts. Made Jenny stand up, moving her like a puppet. The possessed girl began to walk toward me. "But you, Samuel, you're even better. Bell blood and Cherokee heritage through your great-grandfather's line. You could host me completely, give me a permanent foothold in this world." My radio crackled to life. Through the static, I heard a familiar voice. "Sam? Sam, if you can hear me, I'm coming down. Alice Thornton, backup ranger. Jim sent me when you missed your check-in." Stabilized through Jenny. More playmates. How wonderful. The possessed girl raised the glowing stone, and the chamber began to shake. Dust and small rocks fell from the ceiling. "I'm sealing the cave," Kate announced. "No one leaves until I have what I want." Through my radio, I heard Alice's voice again, now urgent. "Sam, the cave entrance just collapsed. I'm trapped down here too." Kate clapped Jenny's hands together like a delighted child. "Alice Thornton. I know all about her. Cherokee grandmother, psychic sensitivity, trained in both modern rescue techniques and traditional spiritual practices. She's been investigating supernatural incidents unofficially for years." I realized Kate had been planning this. She'd lured the college students here first, then used them to draw me in. Now she had both rangers she needed. "What do you want?" I asked. "Freedom," Kate said simply. "I've been bound to these caves for over a century, trapped by Cherokee magic and Christian prayers. But the barriers are weakening. Tourism, development, modern excavation, all of it disrupts the old protections. Soon, I'll be free to walk the world again." Windshield Jenny's body began to change more dramatically. Her fingernails grew into claws, and her spine elongated, forcing her to hunch forward. Kate was reshaping her host. "Unquestioned," Kate continued, "I need anchors in your world, bodies that can channel my power. Jenny was just practice. You and Alice will be my true vessels." The radio crackled again. "Sam, can you hear me? I found something down here. Cherokee warning symbols. This place is under spiritual quarantine." Keyboards snarled through Jenny's transformed mouth. That meddling bloodline, always trying to contain what they don't understand. She shook again, more violently this time. Cracks appeared in the limestone walls. "Your friend Alice is closer than she knows," Kate said. "She's found the old binding chamber. But she doesn't know the words to renew the seals. Only I know those words now." I saw my chance. If Alice was at the binding chamber, maybe together we could figure out how to contain Kate again. But first, I had to get past Jenny. The flare was burning down to nothing. In a few minutes, I'd be in total darkness, with whatever Kate had turned Jenny Morrison into. I made my decision and ran. Baptized, I sprinted through the narrow passage as Kate's shriek of rage echoed behind me. Jenny's transformed body was fast, but the tight confines of the tunnel worked in my favor. I could hear her claws scraping against the limestone as she pursued me. My dying flare cast wild shadows on the cave walls as I ran. The petroglyphs seemed to writhe and dance in the flickering light, and I could swear some of them were trying to communicate with me, warnings in a language I almost understood. I burst into the main chamber where I'd left the 3 aged students. They were gone,
vanished completely, along with their backpacks. Only the stone circle remained, and it was glowing now with the same cold blue light I'd seen in Jenny's hands. My radio crackled. "Sam, I can see your light. I'm in the chamber with the Cherokee symbols." I followed the sound of Alice's voice through a passage I was sure hadn't existed when I first entered the cave.
The tunnel walls here were covered in fresh scratch marks that spelled out words in English. Family, blood, binding, freedom. Found Alice Thornton in a circular chamber carved entirely by human hands. The walls were covered floor to ceiling with Cherokee petroglyphs, and in the center of the room was a depression in the stone floor, filled with what looked like charcoal and burned bones. Alice was kneeling beside the depression, studying the symbols with a small notebook. She looked up when I entered, and I saw she was younger than I'd expected, maybe 30, with long dark hair and intelligent brown eyes. "Sam Birchwood?" she asked. "Thank God you're alive. Jim Crawford sent me when you missed your check-in. What the hell is happening down here?" "How much do you know about Cherokee spiritual practices?" I asked urgently. "More than most rangers," she admitted. "My grandmother was Eastern Band Cherokee. She taught me some of the old ways before she died. Why?" The chamber suddenly filled with Kate's laughter. It seemed to come from the walls themselves. "How touching," Kate's voice echoed around us. "A family reunion. Alice Thornton, your grandmother was Sarah Cornsilk. She helped bind me to these caves in 1847 after I grew too strong for the Tennessee seals to contain." Alice went pale. "That's impossible. My grandmother never mentioned—" "Didn't," Kate interrupted. "The fewer people who knew the truth, the stronger the binding. But she taught you the old words, didn't she? The prayers of protection? The songs of power?" I grabbed Alice's arm. "We need to get out of here. There's something else down here. Something that's possessed one of the missing students." Alice shook her head. "The cave entrance collapsed. I barely made it through before the rocks came down. We're trapped." Kate's grew louder. "Old times." The temperature in the chamber plummeted. Our breath turned to fog as frost began forming on the ancient symbols covering the walls. "This is the original binding chamber," Alice said, studying the petroglyphs. "These symbols, they're a containment spell. But they're old, maybe 200 years. The power is fading." "Alternating? Can you renew them?" I asked. "I'd need to remember my grandmother's songs, and I'd need—" She trailed off, looking at the burned bones in the stone depression. "I'd need a blood sacrifice. Cherokee blood." Voice turned seductive. "Or you could simply join me, Alice Cornsilk Thornton. Your grandmother denied me, but you don't have to. I could give you power beyond imagination, knowledge of all hidden things." Images flooded my mind, visions of myself and Alice walking through the forest, but changed. Our eyes glowing with supernatural light, our hands wreathed in blue fire. Kate was showing us what we could become. Alice gasped, seeing the same visions. "She's in my head." "The Cherokee blood makes you sensitive to my realm," Kate explained. "But the Bell blood in Samuel makes him the perfect anchor. Together, you could be my generals in the coming war." "What war?" I asked. The chamber filled with new voices, dozens of them, all speaking at once. I recognized some from local legends. The Beast of Bladenborough, the Fook Monster, the Pope Lick Monster, all the creatures that haunted Appalachian folklore. "We are legion," they said in unison, "bound and imprisoned by settlers' prayers and indigenous magic. But the barriers weaken as faith fades and old knowledge is forgotten. Soon we will be free to reclaim what was taken from us." Alice was studying the symbols frantically. "The binding isn't just for Kate," she said. "This chamber is a keystone. If it fails, every supernatural entity in the Appalachians goes free." Kate's voice turned threatening. "Choose quickly. Serve me willingly, or watch your world burn as my armies are unleashed." Sounds from the passage we'd entered through. Jenny Morrison emerged into the chamber, but she was barely human anymore. Kate had continued reshaping her,
twisting her into something that looked like a cross between a woman and a cave-dwelling creature. Her eyes glowed blue, and her claws left deep gouges in the stone floor. "Time's up," Kate said through Jenny's deformed mouth. Alice suddenly stood up, her eyes bright with realization. "I remember the songs. My grandmother made me memorize them, said they were just old Cherokee lullabies. But they weren't lullabies at all." She began to sing in Cherokee, her voice clear and strong. The symbols on the walls began to glow in response, pulsing with golden light that pushed back against Kate's cold blue radiance. Kate shrieked in rage, and Jenny's transformed body lunged toward Alice. I intercepted her, tackling the creature to the ground. Her claws raked across my chest, tearing through my jacket and shirt, but I held on. "Keep singing!" I yelled. Alexander's voice grew stronger, and I could feel power building in the chamber. The Cherokee symbols blazed brighter, and the stone depression in the center began to smoke. Kate fought back with everything she had. The chamber shook violently, and rocks fell from the ceiling. My headlamp went out, leaving only the supernatural glow of the symbols to light our battle. Jenny's twisted form was incredibly strong, but I could see that Kate's hold on her was weakening as Alice's song continued. The possessing spirit was being pulled back toward the binding chamber's center. "The sacrifice!" Alice called out, still singing. "I need Cherokee blood in the binding circle." Without hesitation, I drew my knife and cut across my palm. My blood, carrying both Bell and Cherokee heritage, dripped onto the burned bones in the stone depression. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Golden fire erupted from the binding circle, racing along lines carved in the chamber floor that I hadn't noticed before. The Cherokee symbols on the walls flared so brightly I had to shield my eyes. Kate's scream of rage and frustration was deafening. Jenny's transformed body convulsed as the possessing spirit was torn away from her host. "This isn't over!" Kate's voice echoed as she was pulled back into the spiritual realm. "The barriers weaken every day. I will find another way." The supernatural fire reached every symbol in the chamber, renewing the ancient binding with my blood and Alice's sacred songs. I felt something snap into place, like a door slamming shut and locking. Jenny Morrison collapsed, her body rapidly returning to its normal human form. The cold blue light faded, leaving only the warm golden glow of the Cherokee magic. Alice finished her song and slumped against the wall, exhausted. "It's done. The binding is renewed." I knelt beside Jenny and checked her pulse. She was breathing normally, and the terrible transformations Kate had inflicted were gone. She looked like a normal, 20-year-old college student again, but I knew our troubles were far from over. Jenny Morrison woke up 3 hours later in the hospital in Stanton. She had no memory of her possession, which the doctors attributed to severe hypothermia and trauma. Her parents drove up from Louisville and took her home. She switched her major to art history and never spoke publicly about what happened in the caves. The official report listed the incident as a cave-in caused by geological instability. The 3 other students were found near the entrance, suffering from exposure and memory loss. They recovered physically, though they all seemed to age a few years during their ordeal. The cave system was permanently sealed for public safety. But Alice Thornton and I knew the truth. "Paraframother left me more than just songs," Alice told me a week after the incident. We were sitting in my ranger station, going through her grandmother's old papers. She kept records. Kate Isn't Bats isn't the only entity bound in these mountains. There are dozens of them, maybe hundreds. She showed me a hand-drawn map of Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia. It was covered in symbols marking caves, old homesteads, and burial grounds where supernatural entities had been contained over the centuries. The Cherokee and other tribes knew about them long before European settlers arrived, Alice explained. They developed methods to bind dangerous spirits to specific locations. When the settlers came, some learned these techniques and helped maintain the containments. "But the knowledge is being lost," I said, understanding the implications. "Exactly. Every generation, fewer people know the old ways. The bindings weaken without proper maintenance, and modern development disturbs the sites." I looked at the map more carefully.
There were marked locations all through the Daniel Boone National Forest. Some I recognized as places where strange accidents had occurred over the years. Unexplained disappearances, equipment failures, animals found dead for no apparent reason. "We need to do something about this," I said. Alice nodded. "My grandmother's papers mention others, rangers, tribal elders, descendants of old families who still remember parts of the truth. There's a network, Sam. People who've been quietly maintaining these bindings for generations." Over the next few months, Alice and I made contact with this hidden network. We learned about the Department of Interior's classified supernatural division, established after World War II, when military operations in remote areas encountered too many unexplained phenomena to ignore. We were officially transferred to a special unit tasked with monitoring and maintaining supernatural containment sites across the Appalachian region. Our cover story was environmental protection work, but our real job was much stranger. I spent the next 5 years learning Cherokee protection rituals from Alice's relatives. She taught me to recognize the signs of weakening bindings and how to perform emergency renewals. Together, we mapped every known containment site in our region and established protocols for regular maintenance. The work was dangerous. Some entities were stronger than Kate, and others had different abilities entirely. We lost 2 team members in Virginia when a binding failed completely, and it took 6 Cherokee spiritual warriors working together to recontain what had escaped. Also saved lives. Dozens of them, probably hundreds if you count the people who might have died if these entities had broken free. Alice eventually became the regional coordinator for supernatural containment operations. I stayed in the field, training new rangers who showed the right combination of bloodline heritage and mental stability to handle the truth. Never married, but we became partners in a way that went deeper than romance. We were guardians, carrying on an ancient responsibility that most people couldn't even imagine. Kate never stopped testing her binding. Every few months, we'd get reports of strange activity in the sealed cave system. Voices echoing from impossible depths, equipment malfunctions, temperature anomalies. But the Cherokee symbols held strong, powered by the renewable binding Alice and I had performed. Sometimes, late at night when I'm patrolling the forest alone, I can still hear Kate's voice on the wind. She whispers promises and threats, trying to find some crack in my resolve. She knows things about my life, my family, my fears that no one should know. But I also carry Alice's songs now, and my grandmother's prayers, and the weight of responsibility passed down through generations of guardians. I know what happens when the barriers fail. The network Alice discovered is larger than we originally thought. There are teams like ours all across America, quietly maintaining containments that keep nightmare creatures locked away from an unsuspecting world. Some focus on entities from Native American traditions. Others deal with things brought over by European settlers or African slaves. A few handle entities that are much older and stranger. We call ourselves the Department of Hidden Services. Officially, we don't exist. Our funding comes through buried line items in environmental and park service budgets. Most of our colleagues have no idea what we really do. But we know, and we remember. Because the alternative is a world where things like Kate bats walk freely among the living, feeding on fear and growing stronger with each passing year. So if you ever find yourself exploring caves in Kentucky, or hiking alone through the deep woods of Appalachia, and you hear voices that shouldn't be there, turn around, walk away, don't investigate. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Some family secrets are meant to be forgotten. And some things are bound in the darkness for very good reasons. We're out here, watching and protecting. The barriers hold because people like Alice and me give everything we have to maintain them. But they hold by choice, not by nature. And every day, that choice has to be made again. My name is David Shadowmere, and I've been a park ranger for 15 years. I know every tree, every trail, and every animal in Jefferson National Forest like they're my own family. That's why what I'm about to tell you scared me so bad I still wake up sweating. It was October 1988,
The leaves were turning gold and red, and millions of birds were flying south for winter like they do every year. I'd seen it 1,000 times before, but this time was different. I was flying my helicopter over Mount Rogers that morning, doing the usual wildlife count. The radio crackled with static, which was weird because the weather was perfect. Clear blue sky, not a cloud anywhere. Then I saw them. Birds. Thousands and thousands of dead birds scattered across the valley floor like someone had dumped them from a truck. They weren't just lying around randomly either. They were arranged in perfect circles and straight lines, making patterns that hurt my eyes to look at. Wolfgang, I landed near Thunder Ridge to get a closer look. The smell hit me first. Not the normal smell of death, but something else. Something wrong, like metal and lightning and fear all mixed together. I'd been in the Air Force before becoming a ranger. I'd seen plane crashes and war zones, but nothing prepared me for what I found down there. 10,000 birds, maybe more. Robins, hawks, geese, songbirds, every kind you could think of. All dead, all arranged in those impossible patterns. I picked up a robin. Its body was perfect. No wounds, no signs of disease. Its eyes were still bright and clear. It looked like it had just stopped, like someone had turned off a switch. My radio squawked. "Ranger Shadowmere, you copy?" "This is Shadowmere. I'm at the Thunder Ridge site. We've got a situation here." "What kind of situation?" I looked around at all those dead birds, at the patterns they made that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. "I don't know yet, but it's big." I called Dr. Rebecca Stone, the wildlife biologist from the university. She was smart, tough, and had seen weird animal behavior before. If anyone could figure this out, she could. "Dead birds don't arrange themselves, David," she said, when I explained what I'd found. "Something did this. The question is what?" Kang, I also reached out to Tommy Youngwolf, a Cherokee tracker who knew these mountains better than anyone alive. His grandfather had taught him the old stories, the ones most people called superstition. After what I'd seen, I wasn't so quick to dismiss anything. "The old ones warned about this," Tommy said, when he saw the photos I'd taken. "They called it the time when the sky demons hunt." I'd always been a facts and science kind of guy. Weather patterns, animal migration, forest management, things I could measure and understand. I'd heard the local stories about the Mothman, the creature people claimed to see flying around Point Pleasant. I figured it was just misidentified owls or people wanting attention. But standing in that valley, surrounded by all those dead birds in their impossible patterns, I felt something I'd never felt before in these mountains. I felt watched. And whatever was watching me wasn't human. The wind picked up, even though the weather report said it would be calm. The trees started making sounds I'd never heard before, not rustling or creaking, but something like whispers, like they were trying to warn me about something. I decided to stay the night and observe the area. Set up camp near my helicopter with all my equipment, night vision scope, radio, flare gun, the works. If something came back to arrange more dead animals, I'd be ready. As the sun went down, the temperature dropped fast. Too fast for October. My breath started showing in the air, and frost began forming on the grass, even though it had been 70 degrees that afternoon. The first sound, a whooshing noise, like massive wings beating the air. But no bird flies at night that could make a sound that big. The whooshing came from overhead, moving in circles around my camp. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it up at the sky. The beam caught something for just a second, something huge and dark, with eyes that glowed red like tail lights. Then it was gone, and the sound faded into the distance. My hands were shaking as I reached for the radio, but when I turned it on, all I got was static. Every frequency, nothing but static. Even my emergency channel was dead. I was alone in those mountains, with something that could kill 10,000 birds in one night, and arrange them in patterns that made my head hurt to look at. something that was watching me from the darkness with glowing red eyes. And somewhere in my gut, I knew this was just the beginning. The next morning, Dr. Stone arrived with a van full of scientific equipment. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. Tommy came in his old pickup truck, carrying a leather bag that his grandfather had given him. Unauthorized, Rebecca said, pulling on latex gloves. We walked through the death zone together. Rebecca took samples, measured distances, and photographed every pattern. Tommy walked around the edges, studying things I couldn't see. Buffering. The electromagnetic readings are off the charts, Rebecca said, checking her instruments. Whatever killed these birds left behind massive electromagnetic residue. Tommy knelt beside one of the bird circles. These patterns, they're the same ones carved in the old stones. The warning stones my people left to mark dangerous places. Warning about what? I asked. Things that hunt from the sky. Things that shouldn't exist in our world. Rebecca stood up from examining a hawk. David, come look at this. Flashlight's chest had been opened with surgical precision.
Not torn or ripped like a predator would do, but cut clean with something incredibly sharp. Inside, every organ was missing except the heart. What kind of animal eats everything but the heart? She asked. No animal I know, I said. What about disease? Parasites? Sluggish, she shook her head. The organs weren't destroyed or consumed. They were removed, harvested. That afternoon we found more dead animals scattered throughout the forest. Deer, rabbits, squirrels, all with the same precise cuts, all missing the same organs, and all arranged in those impossible patterns. We need to call the State Wildlife Department, Rebecca said. This is beyond anything I've seen. Use the radio, we got nothing but static. Our cell phones showed no signal, even though we were in an area that usually had good coverage. It was like something was blocking all our communications. We should leave, Tommy said. Come back with more people, more protection. Prescribe fingers protection from what? Rebecca asked. We still don't know what we're dealing with. Yes, we do, Tommy said quietly. We just don't want to believe it. Polishing. That night we made camp together for safety. 3 people, 3 flashlights, and 1 campfire. Tommy burned something in the fire that smelled like sage and cedar. He said it would help keep dangerous spirits away. There are old stories, he told us as we sat around the flames. Stories about hunters from the sky realm who come to our world every few generations. They scout for resources, they take what they need, and they prepare the way for others. Safeguard. You're talking about folklore, Rebecca said. We need scientific explanations. Science and folklore aren't always different things, Tommy replied. My grandfather fought these creatures in 1932. His grandfather fought them in 1876. They always come back. Around midnight, the fire started burning lower, despite having plenty of wood. The temperature dropped again, that unnatural cold that made our breath fog even though it was still October. We heard the wing beats. Not one creature this time, but several, flying in formation overhead like some kind of military squadron. I grabbed my night vision scope and looked up. What I saw made my blood freeze. 3 massive shapes flying in perfect triangle formation. Each one was huge, bigger than any bird that ever lived, and they moved with purpose, like they were surveying their territory. Do you see them? I whispered. Rebecca took the scope. She was quiet for a long time, then handed it back without saying anything. Her face had gone pale. Didn't need the scope. They know we're here, he said. They're deciding what to do about us. One of the creatures broke formation and flew lower. As it passed overhead, I could see details that made my stomach turn. It looked almost human, but stretched and wrong. Arms that ended in claws, legs that bent the wrong way, and wings, massive leathery wings that blocked out the stars. Its eyes were the worst part. They glowed red like I'd seen before, but now I could see they were looking right at us, studying us, deciding if we were a threat. The creature let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a roar. It was like nothing I'd ever heard, and it seemed to go right through my bones.
Every animal in the forest went silent. Then it flew away, rejoining the others as they disappeared over the ridge. "What the hell was that?" Rebecca whispered. "That," Tommy said, "was a scout. They'll be back with more, and next time they won't just observe." We packed up camp and hiked back to our vehicles in the dark. Nobody talked about what we'd seen, but we all knew our lives had just changed forever. We'd seen something that science said couldn't exist, and it had seen us back. As we reached the parking area, Rebecca's equipment started working again. Her electromagnetic detector was going crazy, showing readings unlike anything in her textbooks. Sluggish. "David," she said, staring at the display, "according to this, those things aren't just animals. They're generating electromagnetic fields strong enough to disrupt all our communications. That's not biology, that's technology." I started my truck, eager to get away from these mountains. But as we drove down the winding road, I kept checking my mirrors, because I had the feeling we were being followed by something that flew silently through the darkness above the trees. And I was right. We met the next morning at the ranger station. None of us had slept. Rebecca looked like she'd been staring at data all night, and Tommy seemed older somehow, like seeing those creatures had taken something out of him. "I've been researching similar incidents," Rebecca said, spreading papers across my desk. "Electromagnetic anomalies, mass animal deaths, unexplained aerial phenomena. It's happened before, but the reports get buried or dismissed." She showed us newspaper clippings going back 50 years, headlines about mysterious flying creatures, electromagnetic storms, and animal die-offs, all in remote areas, all covered up or forgotten. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a report from 1936. "West Virginia mining camp. 100 men reported seeing flying devils with glowing red eyes. 3 days later, a mine collapse killed 18 workers. The survivors said the creatures had been circling the mine for weeks." Terera nodded grimly. 1876, Cherokee Reservation in North Carolina. My great-great-grandfather's journal describes the same things, called them sky hunters, said they came before disasters, like they could see the future. "That's impossible," I said. But even as I said it, I remembered the creature's eyes, the way it had looked at us like it knew something we didn't. My radio crackled to life. "Ranger Shadowmere, we have a situation at White Top Mountain. Campers reporting strange noises and equipment failures." I grabbed my keys. "We all go together. Nobody handles this alone." The drive to White Top took 30 minutes through winding mountain roads. The further we went, the quieter the forest became. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects had gone silent. We found the campsite easily enough. 3 tents still set up, but no people. Their campfire was cold, like it had been out for hours. But their coffee was still warm. "Hello?" I called out. "Forest Service! Anyone here?" Tommy was examining the ground around the tents. "Look at this," he said. The dirt around the campsite was marked with strange impressions, not quite footprints, but close. They were huge, bigger than any human foot, and shaped wrong, like someone had walked on legs that bent backward. Rebecca was checking the abandoned equipment. "Their radio is fried," she said, "completely dead. And look at this." She held up a camera. The back was open, and all the film had been exposed to light. Not just pulled out, but exposed with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. They don't want evidence, I realized. Whatever took these people, it's smart enough to destroy proof. A sound echoed from the ridge above us. That same inhuman cry we'd heard the night before, but closer, much closer. "We need to leave, now," Tommy said. But as we turned to go back to our vehicles, we found our path blocked. A creature stood between us and the parking area. It was even bigger than I'd thought, nearly 8 feet tall, with wings folded against its back like a massive cloak. Its red eyes fixed on us, with intelligence that was definitely not animal. "Nobody move," I whispered. "Don't run. Don't make sudden movements." The creature tilted its head, studying us. It took a step forward, and I could see its feet clearly now. They weren't feet at all, but claws, like a bird of prey, designed for grabbing and carrying. Relics. Rebecca made a small noise in her throat. The creature's head snapped toward her instantly. Its eyes began to glow brighter, and I felt something pressing against my mind. Images flooded my head. Not my memories, but someone else's, or something else's. I saw the campsite from above, like I was flying. I watched the campers run in terror as shapes descended from the sky. I saw them being lifted into the air, their screams cut short as they disappeared into the darkness. And I saw something else. More creatures, dozens of them, hidden in caves throughout the mountains, waiting, breeding, growing stronger. The vision ended abruptly. The creature spread its wings, easily 15 feet across, and launched itself into the air. The downdraft knocked us all to the ground, and by the time I got back to my feet, it was gone. Rebecca gasped. "Did you see what it showed us?" Tommy was already moving toward our trucks. "We need to get to the Cherokee Council, now. This is bigger than just a few missing campers." As we drove away from White Top, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen in that vision. The creature had shown me its memories on purpose. It wanted me to know what was coming. They weren't just random killers. They were organized. They had a plan. And we were running out of time to stop it. That evening, Tommy took us to meet his uncle, William Youngwolf, who served on the Cherokee Tribal Council. The old man listened to our story without interruption, his weathered face growing more serious with each detail. "The time of choosing has come again," he said when we finished. "Every generation, we must decide whether to fight or hide. Your generation's turn has arrived." He led us to a room filled with old artifacts, weapons, stones carved with symbols, and books written in Cherokee syllabary. "These creatures are not from our world," he explained. "They come from a place where the sky touches other skies. They use our mountains as hunting grounds and breeding sites, and every time they come, they're stronger than before." Rebecca studied the carved stones. "These symbols, they match the patterns we found with the dead birds." William said, "Maps, breeding territory markers. They're claiming this land." "How do we fight them?" I asked. The old man smiled grimly, the same way my ancestors did, with courage, wisdom, and weapons they don't expect. An ancient wooden box, and pulled out what looked like an arrowhead made of black stone. But when I touched it, electricity seemed to run up my arm. "These were made for hunting sky demons," William said. "We'll need to make more, many more." Outside, something roared in the distance. Then another roar answered from a different direction, and another. They were calling to each other across the mountains, coordinating, preparing for something big. "How many are there?" Rebecca asked. William closed his eyes and listened to the sounds echoing through the darkness. "Enough," he said quietly. "More than enough." The attack started 3 days later. At first, it was just missing hikers and campers, people who ventured too far into the remote areas and never came back. The local sheriff blamed bears or accidents, but we knew better. Then the creatures got bolder. A construction crew working on a new road reported being dive-bombed by something like a giant bat. 2 workers ended up in the hospital with deep claw marks across their backs. Rebecca had been studying the electromagnetic readings, and what she found terrified us all. "They're not just hunting randomly," she explained, showing us her charts. "Look at the pattern. They're systematically clearing out every living thing in specific areas,
Creating zones where nothing survives. Hunting preserves," Tommy said darkly.
My grandfather's journal mentions this. They clear out areas and turn them into nesting sites." Youngwolf had gathered warriors from 3 different Cherokee communities, old men mostly, but tough as leather and carrying weapons that looked ancient but felt powerful. They'd been preparing for this fight their whole lives. "We have one advantage," William told us. "They don't know we still remember the old ways. They think we've forgotten how to fight them. It lasts long." But our advantage didn't. Stone started changing after our second encounter with the creatures. She became obsessed with studying them, spending hours staring at the electromagnetic readings and muttering about evolutionary advancement. "They're not invaders," she told me one night. "They're teachers. They're showing us what we could become." I should have seen the warning signs. The way her eyes started reflecting light differently. How she always seemed to know where the creatures would appear next. The way she began drawing the same symbols we'd found with the dead birds. The truth came out during our planned assault on one of their nesting sites. We'd tracked a group of creatures to a cave system near Mount Rogers. William's warriors had surrounded the area with traditional protective symbols, and we were prepared to use the ancient weapons against them. But Rebecca led the creatures straight to us. "You don't understand," she said as the first creature landed behind our position. "They're not our enemies. They're evolution itself." Tommy tried to stop her, wasn't human anymore. While they struggled, more creatures emerged from the cave. Not 3 or 4 like we'd seen before, but dozens. "She's been talking to them," William realized.
They've been using her to learn about us. The battle that followed was unlike anything I could have imagined. The Cherokee warriors fought with arrows and spears that seemed to burn the creatures when they struck. But for every creature we brought down, 2 more appeared from the darkness. I found myself face to face with the largest one yet, nearly 10 feet tall, with scars across its chest like old battle wounds. This was their leader, and it wanted me, specifically. Again, images flooded my mind, but this time I fought back. I forced my own thoughts into its head, showing it every detail of our defenses, every weapon we had, every person we were trying to protect. The creature recoiled in surprise. It hadn't expected resistance. "Defiance," I shouted to the others over the sound of battle. "Advance team for something bigger. They're preparing Earth for invasion." Turbulence put an arrow through the creature's wing, sending it crashing to the ground. But as it fell, it let out a piercing cry that echoed across the mountains. An alarm call. Wilson shouted, "More are coming, many more." We retreated toward our vehicles, carrying our wounded. Rebecca tried to follow us, but she wasn't Rebecca anymore. Whatever the creatures had done to her mind had taken away everything that made her human. Tommy made the hardest choice of all. As she ran toward the creatures to warn them of our escape route, he put an arrow through her heart. She died instantly, but the look of gratitude in her eyes told us she was herself again at the end. The sky filled with flying shapes as we reached our trucks. Hundreds of them, all converging on our position. We'd kicked the hornet's nest, and now they were coming with everything they had. "Drive!" I yelled, gunning my engine. We raced down the mountain roads with creatures diving at our vehicles. My windshield cracked under the impact of claws.
Ton's truck rolled twice when something grabbed it from above, but he crawled out and kept fighting. Bottom of the mountain, William performed one final ceremony. Using his own blood and words in the old language, he sealed the mountain passes. The creatures could still fly over, but they couldn't bring their young through the ancient paths anymore. It mended his life. As the seal took hold, every creature in the area converged on him. He died fighting, taking down 3 of them with his bare hands and the old weapons. The immediate threat was contained. The creatures retreated to their caves to regroup, and we had bought time to prepare for what was coming next. The visions had shown me the truth. This wasn't just about a few creatures in one mountain range. They had colonies all over the world, all preparing for the same thing. Blazing. A full invasion. And it was coming soon. That was 37 years ago. I'm an old man now, and I've spent every day since then watching the skies and training others to do the same. The government finally took notice after we presented them with proof they couldn't ignore. Bodies, photographs, electromagnetic recordings. But instead of going public, they classified everything and started their own secret program. Commissioner, I became the liaison between the military and the Cherokee spiritual warriors. It's a strange job, teaching helicopter pilots how to fight interdimensional creatures while learning ancient ceremonies that conceal doorways between worlds. Tommy survived that night on the mountain, though he carries scars that never fully healed. He runs the Cherokee side of the operation now, training young warriors in the old ways and keeping watch over the sealed passages. We've learned a lot about them over the years. They're not just random monsters, they're organized, intelligent, and patient. What we fought that night was just the advance team. The real invasion force is still coming. Forbidden. They reproduce quickly, adapt fast, and learn from every encounter. The second generation could camouflage themselves. The third generation showed signs of telepathic communication. We've stopped counting generations now because they've become too human-looking to easily identify. But we're stronger too. The Cherokee spiritual weapons work when combined with modern technology. We've built detection networks across the Appalachian Mountains. We've trained specialized military units in supernatural combat. Most importantly, we've learned to work together. Indigenous knowledge and government resources, ancient wisdom and modern science. It's the only way to fight something that exists in both the physical world and the spiritual realm. The creatures still hunt in remote areas. We contain what we can and cover up what we can't. Missing hikers get blamed on bears or getting lost. Electromagnetic anomalies get explained as solar flares or equipment malfunctions. Sometimes, late at night when spike, I still see them flying over the mountains, watching, waiting, planning. They know we're ready for them now. They know we remember the old ways and have new weapons. So they're being more careful, more patient. The Cherokee prophecies say the final battle will come when the sky splits open and their full force arrives. Not dozens of creatures, but thousands, maybe millions. I won't live to see that day. My arthritis keeps me grounded now, and my eyes aren't sharp enough for night watches anymore. But I've trained my replacement, a young Cherokee woman who can fly helicopters and speak to spirits with equal skill. The knowledge continues, the watch continues, the weapons are ready. And when those things finally come in force, we'll be waiting for them. Reading this and you live in the mountains, anywhere in the world, pay attention to the signs. Unexplained animal deaths, electromagnetic disturbances, the sudden silence of all wildlife. And if you see something with glowing red eyes flying overhead, don't try to photograph it. Don't try to prove it exists. Just run and call the authorities. Because some secrets are kept to protect people, not to hide the truth. Behind the Mothman's brood is real. They're out there, and they're still waiting for their chance to claim this world as their own. But as long as people like us keep watching the skies, they'll have to keep waiting. The mountains remember, and
My name is Ernest Crowfeather, and I've been a park ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 12 years. People always ask about the name. Half Cherokee from my wife Lucy's side, half Irish stubbornness from my father's. The Cherokee part matters more than I knew back in 1959, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I was 34 then, with 2 kids and a job I loved. Lucy would pack me coffee in a thermos every morning, black as mountain soil, and I'd head out to patrol trails most folks never see. 25 miles from the nearest town, up where the old-growth forest still stands thick and quiet. That's my territory, the deep woods where cell phones don't work, and the nearest help is a day's hike away. October that year came early and cold. The leaves turned gold and red, like someone had set the mountains on fire. Hunting season was starting, which meant more people heading into places they had no business being. But hunters I could handle. What happened with the Mackenzie family was something else entirely. They came from Scotland, a grandfather, his son, daughter-in-law, and 2 grandkids. Good people by all accounts. Filed their camping permits properly, brought the right gear, told us exactly where they planned to hike. The kind of visitors who follow rules and respect the wilderness. When they didn't check out on schedule, we waited an extra day. Sometimes families lose track of time in the mountains, but when we found their campsite near Cataract Falls, I knew something was very wrong. Racked, tents were shredded, not torn by wind or damaged by bears, shredded, long, clean cuts that went through canvas and aluminum poles like paper. Their food was untouched, still hanging properly in bear bags 15 feet off the ground. No animal goes to that much trouble to ignore food.
but the tracks stopped my heart cold. Human footprints led into camp, normal hiking boots, size 10 or so. Then, halfway across the clearing, they changed. The left foot stayed human, but the right became something else. 4 toe pads and claws. Big claws. The kind that could shred a tent without effort. Psychologists, I'd been tracking animals since I was a boy, learned from my Cherokee grandfather before he passed. Bears, mountain lions, deer. I know their sign like reading a book. These tracks didn't belong to any animal I'd ever seen. Barbara Alex Morrison arrived with the search dogs around noon. Jake was good people, ex-military like me, steady hands, calm head. The dogs were his pride and joy, trained for mountain rescue, never failed to find someone before. They took one sniff of those strange tracks and backed away, whimpering. Ranger, Jake's best bloodhound, actually tried to climb back into the truck. In 12 years of search and rescue, I'd never seen dogs act like that. "What do you think spooked them?" Jake asked, scratching his head. I have an answer. Not yet. We expanded the search grid, brought in Tommy Swimmer from the Cherokee Reservation as our guide. Tommy knew these mountains like his own backyard, could track a ghost through running water. But when he saw those mixed tracks, his face went pale. "We should call this off," he said quietly. "Call in the state police, let them handle it. 5 people are missing, Tommy, a family with kids." He looked at the claw marks on the trees, 4 parallel gouges that went 20 feet straight up an old oak. "Some things are worse than being lost, Ernest." I thought he was being dramatic. Mountain folk love their ghost stories, their legends about things that hunt in the deep woods. I figured we were looking at an injured mountain lion, maybe rabid, maybe just territorial. Big cats can walk on their hind legs sometimes when they're hurt. I was wrong about everything. As the sun started setting, we made camp near the destroyed site. Standard procedure: establish a base, search in expanding circles at first light. The temperature dropped 20 degrees after dark, which wasn't unusual for October, but it dropped fast, like someone had opened a freezer door. When we heard it, a sound like a woman crying, but wrong somehow, too deep, too wild. It echoed off the ridge walls until you couldn't tell where it came from. The dogs huddled against Jake, shaking. "Bobcat," I said, trying to convince myself. "They sound almost human sometimes." Tommy Swimmer was staring into the darkness beyond our firelight. "That's no bobcat," he whispered. "That's the wampus cat, and she's hunting." Gampus cat stories before, Cherokee folklore about a woman transformed into something between human and mountain lion. Every kid who grew up near the reservation knew the tales. But Tommy wasn't telling stories around a campfire. He was scared, genuinely scared, and Tommy Swimmer wasn't afraid of anything in these mountains. "Tell me about the wampus cat," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Toke the fire with a stick, sending sparks into the cold air. Her name was Running Deer. Long time ago, maybe 200 years, she broke sacred law, spied on the men's hunting ceremonies where women weren't allowed. The spirits punished her, turned her into something that could never be fully human or fully animal again. And you think she's still out here? Every 20, 30 years people disappear. Always the same pattern. Camps destroyed, strange tracks, families vanishing without trace. My grandfather told stories. His grandfather told stories. Goes back generations. Jake was checking his rifle, though he kept it casual. Assuming this isn't folklore, what exactly are we dealing with? Something that thinks like a person but hunts like a cat. Something that can change its shape, walk on 2 legs or 4. Something that's been angry for 2 centuries and takes it out on anyone who gets too deep into her territory. The crying sound came again, closer this time, definitely moving in our direction. I'd been in Korea, seen combat, faced down armed men trying to kill me. But this sound made my skin crawl in a way gunfire never did. Our dog suddenly bolted, just ran straight into the dark woods, yelping like something was chasing them. 3 trained search and rescue animals, abandoning their handlers. That doesn't happen. "We need to find those dogs," Jake said, grabbing his flashlight. "No," Tommy grabbed his arm. "Dogs know better than people sometimes. They're not running from something, they're running to safety." I was about to argue when we heard branches snapping in the tree line, heavy footsteps, but the rhythm was wrong. Not quite human, not quite animal. Something moving carefully, testing each step. My flashlight beam caught yellow eyes 30 feet away, not reflecting yellow like deer or raccoons, glowing yellow, like there was fire behind them. They were too high off the ground to be any normal animal, maybe 6 feet up, but they moved side to side like a cat watching prey. "Everyone stay calm," I whispered, reaching for my sidearm. "Don't run, don't make sudden movements." The eyes disappeared. Complete darkness, complete silence. Even the normal night sounds, owls, insects, small animals moving through leaves, everything stopped. Then something landed in our camp, terminated the ground between our tents like it had dropped from the sky. Bipedal, covered in dark fur or hair, built like a linebacker but moving like a dancer. The face was the worst part. Human enough to show intelligence, animal enough to show hunger. Those yellow eyes fixed on each of us in turn, measuring, deciding. Jake's rifle was up and aimed before I could blink. "Federal agents! Don't move!" The thing tilted its head like it was amused. When it spoke, the voice was female, accented, but with an undertone that made my teeth ache. "Acknowledgement. You hunt in my domain without permission," it said. "You bring guns to sacred ground. You disturb the bones of my people." "We're looking for a missing family," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The Mackenzies. Have you seen them?" It smiled, showing teeth that belonged in a big cat's mouth. "I have tasted them. Their hearts were strong, full of fear. The children's hearts were sweetest." Jake's finger tightened on the trigger. "You killed kids?" "I am what your kind made me. Hunter, killer, forever hungry. Their hearts feed my curse, keep me strong enough to hunt again." Indifferent, I'd seen death before, dealt with murders and accidents in my years as a ranger. But the casual way it talked about killing children hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't some mountain lion or rabid animal. This was something that chose to hurt people. "Where their bodies?" I demanded. It gestured toward the deeper woods with one clawed hand. "Safe in the trees, away from scavengers. I keep them fresh for when hunger comes again." That's when Jake fired. 3 quick shots, center mass, the kind of grouping that drops a man instantly. The bullets hit. I saw the impacts, but the creature just staggered back a step and laughed. "Iron cannot kill what iron created," it said. "Your people's weapons made me. Cherokee magic keeps me alive." Indicted faster than anything that size should move. One moment, it was 10 feet away. The next, it had Jake by the throat, lifting him off the ground with one hand. His rifle fell into the fire, sending sparks everywhere. "But you can still bleed," it whispered, and its claws extended like switchblades. I emptied my pistol into its back, all 6 rounds. It turned to look at me with mild irritation, still holding Jake in the air. "Your turn will come, Ranger man. But first I smell Cherokee blood on you. That makes you special." Bandwidth, it dropped Jake and vanished into the darkness. Not ran, vanished. Like it had never been there, except for the claw marks on Jake's neck and the lingering smell of something wild and wrong. Jake was unconscious but breathing. Tommy was praying in Cherokee, words I didn't understand but recognized as desperate. And somewhere in the darkness, that thing was still out there, still hunting. I radioed for emergency backup and medical evacuation, but we were too far out, too deep in the mountains. The radio crackled with static and dead air. We were on our own with something that had killed a family and promised to kill us too. The worst part was what it had said about Cherokee blood, about me being special. Lucy was full-blood Cherokee, which made our kids half. If this thing was targeting people with Cherokee heritage, my family was in danger. As I tried to stop Jake's bleeding, and Tommy kept watch with a rifle that we now knew was useless, I realized we weren't dealing with an animal or even a person. We were dealing with something that had been hunting these mountains for 200 years, something that modern weapons couldn't kill. Unless who I was. We spent the rest of the night taking turns on watch, while Jake drifted in and out of consciousness. The claw marks on his neck were deep but clean, like surgical cuts. They should have killed him, But the creature had been precise, careful. It wanted him alive. "Why didn't it kill us?" I asked Tommy during his watch shift. "Maybe it's not time yet. Maybe it's playing with us." He was carving something into a piece of oak with his hunting knife. Symbols I didn't recognize but felt important. My grandfather gave me these protection marks. Might help, might not. But Cherokee magic is old, older than whatever curse made that thing. Dawn broke, we found the Mackenzie family. They were arranged in a circle 40 feet up in the branches of an ancient oak tree. Not thrown there, not dragged up, arranged. Each body was positioned carefully,
Arms folded, eyes closed.
Someone, or something, had taken time with them, treated them with a respect that made the whole scene even more disturbing. The hearts had been removed with surgical precision. No torn flesh, no savage wounds. Clean cuts that suggested both intelligence and practice. This wasn't random killing, it was ritual. "Jesus," Jake whispered. He was awake now, voice hoarse from the throat wounds. Who could get bodies that high up? That tree doesn't have branches for the first 30 feet. Officers were studying the symbols carved into the oak's trunk. She could. Wampus cat can climb anything, jump higher than any normal animal. But look at these markings. The symbols were Cherokee, but older than anything I'd seen before. They seemed to shift and move when I looked directly at them, making my eyes water. What do they say? Old words, warning words. This is sacred ground, and she's protecting it the only way she knows how. Tommy's face was grim. The family wasn't random, Ernest. They camped on Cherokee burial ground, disturbed ancestor spirits. Discharged, that doesn't justify murder. No, but it explains why she's so angry. We called in the state police and coroner, but it would take them hours to reach us. While we waited, I tried reaching Lucy on the radio. Static and dead air. Tried calling the ranger station. Nothing. Communications are down across the entire grid, Jake reported. Whatever that thing is, it's jamming our signals somehow. That's when we found the second campsite. At the Mackenzie location, we discovered the remains of another camp. This one was older, maybe a week or two. 2 tents, both shredded the same way. But no bodies this time, just bloodstains, and more of those impossible tracks. "Cardboard college kids," Jake said, reading the abandoned permit forms. "From Kentucky, hiking the Appalachian Trail connection." Tommy was examining the ground around their fire pit. They ran. Got away, but she followed. Track pattern shows pursuit, fear, desperate flight through heavy brush. Lung half a mile before finding them, or what was left of them. The young man had made it farther. His body was tangled in a deadfall 100 yards ahead of his girlfriend. Both had claw marks across their backs, deep gouges that suggested the creature had been toying with them, letting them think they could escape. 3 separate incidents, I said, trying to think like a cop instead of a scared man. 3 different time periods. This isn't random hunting, it's pattern behavior. Jake was checking their backpacks for identification. And she's getting bolder. More frequent kills, less effort to hide evidence. A branch snapped behind us. We spun around, weapons ready. I think the other beginning, the Tracketly world-only empty forest. The normal sounds of daytime birds and insects had stopped again, that same unnatural silence we'd experienced the night before. "She's watching us," Tommy said quietly, deciding when to finish what she started. Radio crackled to life. Static, then a voice, Lucy's voice, but wrong somehow, too calm, too distant. "Ernest? Ernest, are you there? Something's wrong at home. Something's watching the children." "Where are you? Are you safe?" Disappointment. "The windows, Ernest. She's at the windows, looking in. Yellow eyes, just watching. The kids are scared." Wavelength. The radio went dead. I tried calling back, but got only static. "It's 25 miles to our house," I told Jake and Tommy. "If I leave now, drive hard, I can be there in 2 hours." "That's what it wants," Tommy said. "Split us up, isolate us. Classic hunter behavior." "My family. You run straight into its trap. We need help, Ernest. Real help. Cherokee help. He pulled out an old cell phone and dialed a number. Somehow, impossibly, the call went through. "Grandfather? It's Tommy. We need you to come to Cataract Falls.
Bring the old weapons, the blessed ones, and bring the other warriors." A pause.
"Yes, grandfather. It's the Wampus cat. She's hunting again." While we waited for Tommy's grandfather, Jake and I secured the crime scenes as best we could. But the creature, running deer, the Wampus cat, wasn't done with us yet. Feng. The attacks came in broad daylight. First, our vehicles. All 4 tires on my truck, slashed with surgical precision. Jake's Ranger Jeep had its engine compartment torn apart, wires and hoses scattered like confetti. We were stranded, 25 miles from help, with something that could apparently disable modern machinery. Then, the psychological warfare began. Items from our packs appeared in strange places. My spare socks hanging from tree branches 30 feet up, Jake's compass buried point down in the exact center of the Mackenzie family's original campfire. Personal items arranged in patterns that suggested we were being studied, catalogued, prepared for something. "She's learning about us," Tommy said. "How we think, what we fear, what matters to us." The radio chattered to life again. Lucy's voice, my children's voices, calling for help. But the timing was wrong, the words slightly off. It was mimicking them, using their voices as bait. "Daddy, please come home. The kitty lady is scratching at my window." My daughter Sarah's voice, perfect, except for the adult fear underneath the child's words. No 6-year-old talks about being afraid with that kind of controlled terror. Jake said, but I was already reaching for the radio. "Don't respond," Tommy warned. "It's studying your voice patterns, learning how you communicate with family. Anything you say, it can use against them later." As afternoon shadows grew longer, we heard vehicles approaching. Tommy's grandfather, Joseph Swimmer, along with 3 other Cherokee men I didn't recognize. They came armed with weapons I'd never seen before. Traditional bows, arrows tipped with what looked like carved bone, knives that seemed to drink in sunlight. "Ernest Crowfeather," Joseph said, looking me up and down with sharp eyes. "Lucy's husband. Your bloodline runs deep in Cherokee history, deeper than you know." Unrecognized. What does that mean? Forensic. It means the Wampus cat isn't hunting random victims anymore. It's hunting specific bloodlines, and yours connects directly to the woman who became the curse. He handed me one of the bone-tipped arrows. "Running deer was your wife's great-great-grandmother. That makes your children part of the original bloodline. The Wampus cat isn't just killing for territory now. It's trying to complete a family curse that's been waiting 200 years. Earthly, everything clicked into place. The personal items, the mimicked voices, the focus on me specifically. This wasn't random hunting. It was targeted, purposeful, personal. My family wasn't just in danger. They were the real target. And I was exactly where the creature wanted me, 25 miles away, unable to protect them. Joseph Swimmer spread an old hide map across a fallen log, marking locations with charcoal. "Running deer was cursed at this exact spot," he said, pointing to where we stood. "Her spirit is bound to these mountains, but her power grows stronger when she feeds on her own bloodline." "You're saying she's been hunting her own descendants for 200 years? "The curse demands it. Every generation, she must take hearts from her bloodline or lose her form completely. Your children represent the latest generation. If she kills them, the curse becomes permanent. If she doesn't..." He looked grim. "The Cherokee spirits that punished her will finally be able to drag her soul to judgment." Jake was studying the Cherokee weapons with professional interest. "So what's the plan?"
"These arrows can kill something our rifles can't touch. Blessed by 7 generations of Cherokee spiritual warriors, tipped with bone from the sacred burial ground she violated. They can wound her, maybe kill her, but only if used correctly." Tommy's radio crackled. "Tommy, this is Ranger Station. We've got reports of a break-in at the Crowfeather residence. Local police are responding, but..." Static. "Jesus, what happened to the patrol car?" Mailbox. My heart stopped. "We need to go. Now." "That's exactly what she wants," Joseph said firmly. "Pull you away from the spiritual anchor point. Fight her on ground of her choosing. The curse started here. It has to end here. My family. Disconnect. We'll die if you fail here. But there's something else you need to know. Joseph's voice was heavy with old sorrow. The curse can only be broken by willing sacrifice from the bloodline. Someone with running deer's blood has to choose to die human rather than live as monster. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Lucy. She's already changing, isn't she? Strange dreams, enhanced senses, moments of rage that don't feel like her own? I thought about the past few weeks. Lucy's night terrors, the way she'd started avoiding mirrors, her sudden ability to track animals by scent alone. Signs I'd missed or ignored. The Wampus cat's presence triggers the transformation in blood relatives, Joseph continued. Your wife is becoming what running deer became. The only way to stop it is through ritual sacrifice before the change completes. A scream echoed across the mountains, not the creature's hunting cry, but something new. Pain, rage, and desperation mixed together. It was coming from the direction of our house. Prohibited. We're out of time, I said. Joseph gathered his warriors. Then we finish this. Cherokee Way. Participates. The battle began before we reached the ritual site. She came at us through the trees like liquid shadow,
moving too fast for human eyes to track properly. The younger Cherokee warriors had positioned themselves in a traditional hunting formation, but the Wampus cat had been fighting their ancestors for 2 centuries. She knew their tactics. The first warrior went down with claw marks across his chest. Not killed. She was still being precise, still making choices about who died when. But the message was clear. She could end any of us whenever she chose. "Spread out," Joseph shouted. "Don't let her corner you. Use the blessed ground." We were fighting on the original curse site now, where Cherokee shamans had first transformed running deer. The symbols carved into trees and rocks seemed to glow with their own light, and the Wampus cat moved differently here, more carefully, like the ground itself was fighting her. Jake put 3 arrows into her torso. Normal arrows would have been useless, but these were blessed Cherokee weapons. Black blood flowed from the wounds, and for the first time since we'd encountered her, the creature looked genuinely hurt. "Iron cannot kill what iron created," she snarled. "But old magic still has teeth." She focused on me now, abandoning the other fighters. "Where is the woman, Ernest Crowfeather? Where is Lucy running deer Crowfeather? She belongs to me now." "She belongs to herself." "Does she? Check your radio, Ranger Man. Listen to what she's becoming." Lucy's voice came through clearly, but wrong in every way that mattered. "Ernest, I can smell everything. Every rabbit in the woods, every deer trail, every human who's passed through here in the last week. And I'm so hungry. God help me, I'm so hungry. Lucy, stay in the house. Lock the doors, keep the kids safe." "The kids." Her voice was changing, becoming deeper, more animal. "They smell like prey, Ernest. My own children smell like prey, and I want to hunt them." The radio went dead.
The Wampus cat smiled, showing those terrible teeth.
"Choose quickly, Ranger Man. Save your wife or save your children. You cannot do both."
Zax when I understood the real trap. This had never been about killing me or even killing my family. It was about forcing impossible choices, breaking spirits along with bodies. The Wampus cat fed on more than hearts. She fed on despair. But Joseph Swimmer had taught me something about Cherokee warfare. Sometimes the only way to win is to refuse the enemy's terms entirely. "Tommy," I called to him, "how long does it take to complete the ritual sacrifice?" "Bernice. Minutes if the person is willing, hours if they fight it." "Preparations. And if someone else volunteers instead?" "Breaking." Joseph's eyes widened with understanding. "The curse requires running deer's bloodline, but it doesn't specify which generation." "Plunge. Lucy, which made me part of the bloodline by marriage and blood mixing. Not the direct target, but close enough for Cherokee magic to accept as substitute." "Ernest, no," Tommy said, reading my intention. "There has to be another way." "Blindness. Lucy keeps her humanity, my kids stay safe, and this thing stops hunting forever. Seems like good math to me." The Wampus cat had been listening to our conversation.
Now she looked uncertain for the first time, like her 200-year plan was coming apart. "Meaningless! You cannot cheat the curse!" she roared. "I have waited too long, suffered too much." "You've suffered," I said, raising one of the blessed arrows. "But you've also murdered innocent people. Time to balance the books." Mucked and I drove the arrow into my own chest, just below the heart. Cherokee magic flowed through the blessed bone tip, burning like fire through my veins. The Wampus cat screamed, not in anger now, but in genuine fear. "Joseph," I gasped, "finish the ritual while the bloodline sacrifice is still fresh." Turbulence. The Cherokee spiritual warriors began chanting in their ancient language, words of binding and judgment that had been waiting 2 centuries to be spoken. The Wampus cat's form began to shift and blur, losing cohesion as the curse that held her together unraveled. Investigators, dying wasn't as easy as I'd hoped. The arrow wound should have killed me in minutes, but Cherokee magic doesn't follow medical rules. Instead of bleeding out, I felt the curse energy flowing through me, showing me 200 years of Running Deer's memories. Her violation of sacred law, her punishment, her endless hunger and rage, and her regret, deep, terrible regret that had grown stronger with each kill, each family destroyed. "Help me," she whispered as her form continued dissolving. "I never wanted this. They made me into monster, but I never wanted to hurt children." Through the curse connection, I could feel her true nature. Not the predator we'd been fighting, but a woman trapped in a nightmare of her own making. The Cherokee shamans had punished her violation of sacred law by turning her into everything she'd feared most. "The ritual," Joseph said urgently. "You have to complete it willingly, Ernest. Accept the curse transfer before you die." Tommy, then at Jake, finally at Joseph. "If I take on her curse, what happens to me?" "You become the guardian instead of the hunter. The curse changes from punishment to responsibility. You protect the sacred sites instead of killing those who violate them." It wasn't death, but it wasn't life as I'd known it either. Still, it was better than letting my family face transformation or letting other families face what the Mackenzies had endured. "I accept," I said. The gan immediately. Power flowed into me as it drained from Running Deer, but it felt different, controlled, purposeful, protective instead of predatory. My senses sharpened until I could hear heartbeats from a mile away, smell individual human scents from hours ago. But the hunger was manageable, directed toward protecting rather than killing. Running Deer's form collapsed completely, revealing the ancient bones of the original Cherokee woman. Joseph and his warriors began the traditional burial ceremony, finally laying her spirit to rest after 2 centuries of torment. "Sluggish," I said into my radio. The connection was clear now, cleaner than it had ever been. "Confiscated." "Ernest? Something's happening. The hunger is going away. I feel normal again." "It's over. Take the kids to your mother's house and wait for me there. I'll explain everything when I get back." Cornophil. "I get back?" The curse had changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. I was stronger, faster, more aware than any human should be. But I was also tied to these mountains now, bound to protect Cherokee's sacred sites and burial grounds from future violations. Amendment. Jake helped me to my feet. The arrow wound had healed completely, leaving only a small scar and the certainty that I wasn't quite human anymore. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now we file reports that make sense to people who don't believe in curses. Bear attacks, hiking accidents, human predators. And we make sure this never happens again." Repetition. Swimmer gathered the blessed weapons. "You'll need training, Ernest. Learning to control what you've become. Understanding your new responsibilities. It won't be easy." Bilingual. "Will I be able to stay with my family?" Paycheck. "Yes, but you'll be different. They'll sense the change even if they can't name it. Your children especially. They carry the bloodline too, and bloodline recognizes power." Polluted. Over the following weeks, we crafted official stories that satisfied authorities. The Mackenzie family and college students had been killed by a rogue mountain lion, later destroyed by park rangers.
Morrison and I received commendations for our courage under fire. The Cherokee involvement was completely omitted from all reports. But the real work was just beginning. I discover other sites across the Appalachians waiting for the right trigger to awaken them. Cherokee burial grounds, sacred hunting territories, places where old magic still held power over the modern world. My new role as guardian meant protecting these sites from development, camping violations, and spiritual disturbances that could create new monsters. The government took notice. Not officially, there are no federal departments that handle supernatural threats, but certain individuals in certain agencies began consulting me on unusual incidents across the Southeast. I became a cultural liaison specialist, which provided cover for my real work. Lucy adapted to having a husband who could track scents like a bloodhound and hear conversations from the next county. The kids grew up knowing their father was different, but they also learned Cherokee traditions from their mother's family and understood the responsibility that came with their heritage. Sometimes, late at night when the mountains are quiet, I can still hear Running Deer's spirit. Not the tortured creature she became, but the woman she was before the curse. She's at peace now, grateful that her 200-year nightmare finally ended. But I also hear other things, older things, deeper things, curses and guardians, spirits and monsters, all maintaining the balance between the modern world and ancient powers that most people will never know exist. My name is Ernest Crowfeather, and I've been protecting the Great Smoky Mountains for 66 years now. People think I look good for my age, but they don't understand that Cherokee magic operates by different rules than normal time. I'm still here because the work isn't finished. There are still sacred sites to protect, still families who might wander into places they don't understand, still curses waiting to be triggered by careless violations of old laws. In other mountains, on other reservations, other guardians are doing the same work. We don't meet often, don't coordinate through official channels, but we know each other by the scent of old magic and the weight of chosen responsibility. The Wampus cat is gone, but the need for protectors remains. And sometimes, just sometimes, when hikers report strange sounds in the deep woods, or campers find their sites mysteriously relocated away from burial grounds, they're encountering not a monster, but a guardian doing what guardians do. We keep the balance. We protect both worlds, and we never stop watching. My name is Rebecca Hollaback, and I've been a park ranger at Cumberland Gap for 8 years now. People always ask about my last name. Sounds made up, right? But it's real, from way back in my family tree. I specialize in the historical sites around here, especially the old settlements tucked away in these mountains where most folks never go. 1995 was colder than usual. The leaves had already fallen, leaving the trees bare and making it easier to spot things that had been hidden all summer. I was driving the back roads near Vardy Valley when the call came in about the missing research team. "Rebecca, we got a problem," my supervisor Jim crackled through the radio. University of Virginia sent a DNA research team up to study some old Melungeon sites. They were supposed to check in 3 days ago. The Melungeons. I knew about them from my anthropology studies. They were this mysterious group of people who lived in these mountains for hundreds of years. Nobody knew exactly where they came from. Some said Portugal, others said Turkey, maybe Cherokee. What everyone agreed on was that they kept to themselves and had their own ways. "Where'd they go missing?" I asked, already turning my truck toward the deeper hollows. "Where was near the old Collins homestead? You know it?" I did. It was one of those places that felt wrong even in broad daylight. The locals wouldn't go near it, and they never wanted to talk about why. In all my years giving tours, whenever I mentioned the old Melungeon settlements, people would get quiet and change the subject. The Collins place sat at the end of a winding dirt road that barely deserved the name.
My truck bounced and rattled over rocks and ruts until I finally saw the old cabin through the trees. It was more falling down than standing up, with a sagging roof and broken windows that looked like dead eyes. But attention was the white van parked beside it. University plates, just like Jim had described. The doors were wide open and equipment was scattered around like someone had left in a hurry. I grabbed my radio and my flashlight, even though it was still afternoon. Something about this place made me want extra light. "Jim, I found their van. Looks like they left everything behind." The silence that came back made my skin crawl. I walked over to look at their stuff. Expensive equipment, DNA analyzers, sample containers, laptop computers. Not the kind of things you just abandon. On the ground near the van, I found a stack of papers held down by a rock. Research notes, genealogy charts, and something that made me stop cold. It was a family tree diagram, but not like any I'd seen before. The names went back 300 years, and some of the connections didn't make sense. People born decades apart were listed as siblings, death dates that came before birth dates, and at the bottom, in fresh ink, someone had written, "Impossible. The DNA doesn't lie, but this can't be right." A wind picked up, rustling the papers in my hands. But there was something weird about it. It sounded almost like voices. Low, mumbling voices speaking words I couldn't quite make out. I looked up at the trees, but they weren't moving at all. That's when I noticed the smell. Sweet and thick, like flowers left too long in water. It was coming from the direction of the old cabin and getting stronger. I've been in these mountains my whole life. I know what normal looks like, and this wasn't it. The hair on my arms stood up, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in my truck and drive away. But 4 people were missing, and I had a job to do. Stabilized, I radio again. "Jim, I'm going to check the cabin. If you don't hear from me in 30 minutes, send backup." The static that came back sounded almost like laughter. The front door of the cabin hung open like a mouth. I called out as I approached, hoping to hear one of the researchers call back. Instead, my voice seemed to get swallowed up by the air itself, like the mountains were drinking the sound. Cabin was bigger, rooms stretched back into shadows that my flashlight couldn't quite reach, even though from the outside I could see this was just a one-room shack. My mind tried to make sense of it, but the harder I looked, the more wrong it became. Research team had set up their equipment in what should have been the main room. Computers hummed quietly, their screens showing data that made my stomach turn. DNA sequences, but not like any I'd learned about in college. These had extra patterns, repeating sections that formed shapes that hurt to look at. On one of the tables, I found more papers, field notes in 4 different handwritings. Day 1. Initial samples from cemetery show unusual genetic markers, preservation beyond anything we've seen. Day 2. Carbon dating inconsistent. Some samples appear to be aging in reverse. Day 3. Genealogy research confirms impossible family connections. Subjects appear to share DNA across centuries. Day 4. Voices in the recording equipment. No one was speaking. Day 4. That was yesterday. I kept reading. Late night, day 4. Sarah saw someone in the cabin with us. Described, elderly woman in old-fashioned dress. When we looked, no one there. Equipment registered presence of 5 additional people. Early morning, day 5. We're not alone here. The locals were right to stay away. The DNA results show something that can't be real. Some of these samples are from people who are still alive, but the tissue is over 200 years old. The last entry was in shaky handwriting. Frustrations. They're all here. All of them. Every generation standing together. They're trying to tell us something, but we can't understand. Going to try voice recordings. I found their audio equipment still running. When I hit playback, my heart nearly stopped. While those few minutes were normal, team members discussing their findings, arguing about test results, then, underneath their voices, other sounds started creeping in. Whispers in languages I didn't recognize.
An old woman humming a tune that made my bones ache. And then, clear as day, a man's voice speaking in an accent I'd never heard before. She comes. The bloodline calls to itself. She will understand what you cannot. One of the researchers, a woman, responded, "Who's there? We can't see anyone." We are always here, in the blood, in the bone, in the memory that passes from mother to child. You dig where you should not dig. You seek what should remain hidden. The woman's voice got shaky. We're just studying genealogy, historical DNA analysis. History lives here. It does not sleep in your machines. That's when the screaming started. Blazing. Not from the researchers, from the equipment itself. Every machine began shrieking at once, a sound like metal being torn apart. On the recording, I could hear the team shouting, panicking, trying to shut down their computers. And underneath it all, that old woman's humming got louder and louder until it drowned out everything else. Then, silence. I checked the timestamp. The recording had stopped at 3:17 a.m. this morning, just 8 hours ago. My hands were shaking as I turned off the playback. That's when I noticed that one of the computers was still running a program. The screen showed a real-time DNA analysis, but the sample container was empty. The machine was analyzing something that wasn't there, and the results kept changing, as if the invisible sample was evolving while I watched. But the worst part was the name at the top of the screen. It said Sample, Rebecca Hollowback, Historical Comparison. They had been running my DNA I'd never given them. And according to the computer, I was a perfect genetic match for samples that were 300 years old. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned around and saw her, an elderly woman in a long brown dress that looked like it came from the 1800s. She had dark skin and sharp eyes that seemed to look right through me. "You should not have come here, child," she said in a voice like wind through autumn leaves. But then again, the blood always calls us home. I tried to speak, but my throat had closed up. "I am Mahala Collins," she said, stepping closer. "And you, Rebecca Hollowback, are my great-great-granddaughter. Welcome to the family." I blinked hard, sure I was seeing things. But when I opened my eyes, Mahala Collins was still there, solid as the floor beneath my feet. She looked maybe 70, but something about her felt much older. "That's impossible," I managed to say. "Collins died in the 1800s. I've read the records." She smiled, showing teeth too white for someone her apparent age. "Records lie, child. Names get changed, dates get mixed up. But blood doesn't lie. Blood remembers everything." She gestured to the computer screen showing my DNA analysis. Those young folks with their machines, they thought they could study us like bugs under glass. They didn't understand that some things study back. "Where are they?" I asked. "The research team?" "Learning," she said simply. "Come, I'll show you." Every instinct told me not to follow her, but my feet moved anyway. She led me deeper into the cabin, through rooms that shouldn't exist, down a hallway that stretched much farther than the building could possibly hold. The smell got stronger as we walked, that sweet, thick scent like old flowers. And with it came other smells: wood smoke, homemade soap, something like wet earth. "The Hollow remembers," Mahala said as we walked. "Every person who lived here, every birth, every death. In a place like this, where the same families lived for generations, all that memory builds up like layers of rock." We reached a door at the end of the hall. She opened it, and cool air rushed out, carrying voices with it. Dozens of voices, maybe more, all speaking at once in a low murmur that sounded like a crowd having conversations in the next room. Beyond the door was a staircase leading down into the mountain itself. The walls were natural stone, but carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. And lining the stairs, like some kind of honor guard, were people. Men, women, children, all dressed in clothes from different time periods. Some wore rough homespun from the 1700s. Others had the simple dresses and work shirts of the early 1900s. All of them had the same dark eyes, the same mix of features that didn't quite fit any one race. All of them were dead.
I could tell because they were slightly transparent, and because some of them had wounds or signs of sickness that should have killed them long ago. But they watched me with intelligence, with purpose. The Melungeon families, Mahala explained. We were never just one thing, not Cherokee, not African, not European. We were something new, something that scared people because they couldn't put us in a box, so they tried to make us disappear. As we walked down the stairs, the dead people turned to follow our progress. I heard whispers in that strange accent from the recording, words I couldn't understand, but that made my chest feel tight. They forced us into these mountains, Mahala continued, took our children away, said our marriages weren't legal, told us we couldn't own land. Some families gave up, tried to pass as white or Cherokee or whatever would keep them safe. But some of us, we went deeper. We found ways to stay connected. The staircase opened into a huge underground chamber, and there, arranged in a circle on the stone floor, were the 4 missing researchers. They were alive but wrong. Their hair had gone completely white, and their skin was wrinkled like they'd aged 50 years in a day. They sat perfectly still, eyes closed, while that low, humming sound came from their throats. "What did you do to them?" I whispered. "Gave them what they wanted," Mahala said. "Knowledge. They wanted to understand our genealogy, so we showed them. All of it. 300 years of family history, experienced all at once." One of the researchers opened her eyes and looked at me. When she spoke, it wasn't in her own voice, but in the same accent I'd heard on the recording. "Tell them," she said. "Tell them we are still here. Tell them the blood remembers." Then her eyes rolled back and she started humming again. "They're stuck," I said, understanding flooding through me. "They're experiencing all those memories at the same time." "The mind can only hold so much," Mahala agreed. "But you're different. You have the blood. You can handle it." She reached out and took my hand. Her skin felt warm, too warm, like she was running a fever. The moment she touched me, the world exploded. Suddenly, I was a young woman in 1847, hiding in these same caves, while men with torches searched for my children. Then I was a teenager in 1923, watching government officials come to measure our heads and declare us not white enough for the schools. Then I was a mother in 1956, holding a baby who had been born with eyes that saw things that weren't there. Remember after memory crashed through my mind. Generations of persecution, of families torn apart, of people who learned to hide their true nature to survive. But underneath it all was something else. Power. The ability to see across time, to communicate with the dead, to know things that happened far away. "We are not just people," Mahala's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "We are a bridge between worlds. The government knows this. They've always known. That's why they try so hard to make us disappear." Investigators shifted. I saw men in suits with government badges, taking notes about genetic anomalies and supernatural bloodlines. I saw laboratories where they experimented on Melungeon children. I saw files labelled Project Hollow, with photos of my own ancestors. "The team?" I gasped, still seeing flashes of other lives. "They weren't just university researchers." "No," Mahala said. "They were scouts. The government wants to study us again, like they did before. But this time, we're ready." Around us began to glow with pale light. The humming from the trapped researchers got louder, and I realized it wasn't just random sound. It was words, repeated over and over. "Protect the bloodline. Protect the secret. Let none pass who would do us harm." And that's when I heard the vehicles outside. Multiple engines, heavy tires on the dirt road. Through the stone walls, I could somehow see them. Black SUVs with government plates. Men with weapons and equipment designed to detect and contain supernatural activity. "They followed the researchers' signal," Mahala said. "They're coming for all of us." The sound of car doors slamming echoed down through the mountain like gunshots. Mahala squeezed my hand tighter, and more memories flooded in. But these were different. These showed me what the Melungeon ancestors could do when they were threatened. Every time they've come for us, she said, we've found ways to protect ourselves. Sometimes we hide, sometimes we fight, and sometimes the air around us began to shimmer. The transparent figures of the dead Melungeons became more solid, more real. Their eyes blazed with cold fire. Sometimes we remind them why their ancestors were afraid of the dark places in these mountains. Heavy footsteps echoed from above, commands being shouted in military-style language. I heard equipment being moved, the high whine of electronic devices powering up. "Rebecca," Mahala said urgently,
"You have a choice to make. Your bloodline connects you to all of this, but you've lived in their world. You can walk away right now, go back to being just a park ranger, and they'll probably leave you alone. Or what? Or you become who you really are." One of the trapped researchers opened her eyes again. This time when she spoke, I recognized the voice. It was my own great-grandmother, who had died when I was 5. "Little bird," she said in the Cherokee my great-grandmother had taught me, "the hollow calls to its children. Will you answer?" Above us, the footsteps had reached the cabin. I heard electronic equipment squealing, the same sound from the audio recording. Whatever the government team had brought to detect supernatural activity, it was going crazy. "Contingency Protocol 7, a man's voice commanded. "Full spectral suppression. No one gets out alive." That's when I understood. This wasn't a rescue mission. They were here to clean up loose ends, the researchers, me, anyone who had seen too much. The missing DNA team had discovered something the government wanted to keep secret, and now everyone involved had to disappear. "They've done this before," I said, the knowledge coming from memories that weren't mine. "To our families, for generations." "Yes," Mahala said, "but never when we were ready for them." She let go of my hand, and immediately I felt stronger, more aware. I could sense the men above us, count their heartbeats, smell their fear sweat. I could feel the electronic equipment they carried like insects crawling on my skin. "Capitalists. What do I need to do?" "Prohibited." "Nothing," she said. "Just remember who you are." Blindness. The chamber filled with light as every one of the dead Melungeons raised their hands. The humming from the trapped researchers became a chant, words in the old language that made the stone walls themselves vibrate. And then I felt them, all of them, every ancestor, every generation of my family that had lived and died in these mountains. Their memories became mine. Their knowledge flowed into me like water rushing into a dry riverbed. I understood now why the government feared us. We weren't just people with unusual DNA. We were living bridges between the world of the living and the world of the dead. We could call on our ancestors for help, access memories that went back centuries, see things that normal people couldn't see. And right now, every Melungeon who had ever died to protect their family was standing in this chamber, ready to fight. The ceiling above us cracked. Dust rained down as heavy machinery started cutting through the floor of the cabin. They were coming down to us, bringing their equipment and weapons into the heart of our ancestral ground. "Bad choice," Mahala said with a smile that would have terrified me an hour ago. The first soldier rappelled through the hole in the ceiling, night vision goggles and automatic weapon ready. He landed in a crouch, scanning for targets. He never saw the Cherokee warrior from 1760, who stepped out of the shadows and touched his forehead. The soldier screamed once and collapsed, his hair gone white, his eyes rolled back in his head. Just like the researchers, he had been given more memories than his mind could hold. More soldiers followed, and each one met the same fate. The dead Melungeons moved like smoke, untouchable by bullets, unstoppable by technology. One by one, the government team experienced 300 years of persecution and pain in the space of heartbeats. But their leader, a man in a suit instead of combat gear, made it to the bottom. He looked around at his unconscious team, at the glowing figures of the dead, at the 4 researchers still chanting in their circle. Then he looked at me. "Rebakbury Hollowback," he said calmly. "Genetic marker M7, bloodline classification Alpha." "We've been monitoring your family for 50 years.
"Who are you?" I asked. though part of me already knew. Department of Paranormal Containment. We study and manage supernatural threats to national security. He pulled out a device that looked like a metal detector. Your people have been on our watch list since 1953. We're not a threat. Your evolution, he said. Humans with abilities that shouldn't exist, connected to knowledge that died centuries ago. Do you have any idea what foreign governments would do to get their hands on that kind of capability? The device in his hands beeped faster as he pointed it at me. You could read the memories of dead enemy agents, access battle strategies from warriors who lived before guns were invented, communicate with the ancestors of foreign leaders. So you kill us. We protect everyone, he said, including you. There are people out there who would dissect your entire bloodline to understand how your abilities work. Mahala stepped forward, and the man's device started screaming warnings. Child, she said to me, he speaks truth, but not the whole truth. She gestured, and the air shimmered. Suddenly the chamber was filled with images. Government laboratories, Melungeon children in cells, scientists taking blood samples and tissue samples, and worse. They don't protect us, she said. They farm us. The man's face went pale. Those programs were discontinued in 1987. Were they? Mahala asked. More images appeared. Recent dates, current facilities, children who looked like me in white rooms with no windows. I felt something hot and bright rising in my chest. 300 years of anger. 300 years of families destroyed by people who saw us as specimens instead of human beings. No more, I said. What happened next is hard to explain in words that don't make me sound crazy. I reached out with abilities I'd never known I had and touched the government agent's mind. Abolished hurt him. I just showed him what we really were, not threats to be contained, but people who had survived centuries of persecution by learning to help each other across the boundaries of life and death. I let him feel what it was like to be hunted for being different, to have your children taken away, to be treated like an animal in a cage. I pulled back. He was crying. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't know. Now you do, Mahala said gently. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? The agent looked around at his unconscious team, at the researchers still lost in ancestral memories, at the glowing figures of the dead watching him with patient eyes. I have to report this, he said slowly, but I can control what I report. Equipment malfunction, Mahala suggested. Research teams suffered psychological breakdown from isolation. All personnel accounted for. No supernatural activity detected. He nodded slowly. The program will be reviewed. There are people in the department who have been questioning the containment protocols. One by one, the dead Melungeons began to fade, their duty done. But I could feel they weren't really gone. They would always be there when their descendants needed them. The trapped researchers slowly came back to themselves, their hair returning to normal color, their minds recovering from the overwhelming flood of memories. They would remember most of it as dreams, strange visions brought on by stress and isolation. Mahala walked over to me as the chamber began to return to normal stone walls. You did well, child, she said, but this is just the beginning. Policing. What do you mean? Clang. There are other bloodlines, other families with abilities they've forgotten how to use. The Cherokee, the Scots-Irish, families all through these mountains who carry power in their blood. She handed me something, a small metal object covered in symbols. You're going to help them remember. I don't know how. You'll learn. And when you do, maybe we can finally stop hiding. She kissed my forehead, and I felt a warmth spread through me that I knew would never completely fade. Welcome home, Rebecca Hollowback. When the rescue teams arrived the next morning, they found everyone safe and accounted for. The research team had no memory of anything supernatural, just a few days of confusing data and equipment failures. The government agents reported equipment malfunction and recommended the area be classified as geologically unstable. A park ranger, but everything was different now. I could sense the history in every stone, hear the whispers of the ancestors in every wind through the trees. And sometimes, late at night when I was alone on patrol, I would see them, figures in old-fashioned clothes watching over their descendants, making sure the hollow stayed protected. 3:43 3 months later, I got a call from a woman in North Carolina. Her family had been experiencing strange dreams, seeing ancestors they'd never met. She'd somehow gotten my number and heard I might understand. I drove down to meet her the next weekend. She had the same eyes as Mahala, the same mix of features that spoke of multiple bloodlines. When I touched her hand, I could feel the power sleeping in her blood, waiting to be awakened. "It's time to stop hiding," I told her, just like Mahala had told me. "Because I understand now that we're not alone. We never were. And maybe, if we help each other remember what we really are, we won't have to be afraid anymore." But sometimes, when I'm walking the trails at Cumberland Gap and the wind carries strange voices through the trees, I remember what the government agents said about foreign governments. I think about children in white rooms and wonder how many other families are still out there, still hiding, still afraid. Sexually are worth protecting, but it also taught me that some secrets are too important to keep hidden forever. The blood remembers everything, and now, so do I. My name is Margaret Stormcrow, and I've been a park ranger in North Carolina's Blue Ridge Mountains for 9 years. People always ask about my last name. It comes from my grandmother's Cherokee blood, though most folks just see a white woman in a green uniform. In 1976, I was 31 and the only female ranger in our district. I loved my job, even when it meant dealing with bears in campgrounds or tracking down poachers in the backcountry. That August was different, though. The drought had been going on for 3 weeks, and the forest felt wrong somehow. Animals were acting strange. Deer coming down to the roads in broad daylight, birds flying in weird patterns. But what really got my attention was the livestock. 47 animals dead in 2 weeks. Cows, goats, even some horses. All of them drained of blood through 2 perfect holes in their necks. No struggle marks, no tracks around the bodies except for the normal farm animals. The farmers were scared and getting angry. I remember the first call came in from Bill Henderson's farm, just outside the National Forest boundary. I drove my truck up the winding mountain road, thinking it was probably wild dogs or maybe a sick bear. Bill met me at his gate, his face white as paper. "Kamal have seen, Margaret," he said, leading me toward his pasture. "Look at this." The cow was lying on its side in the middle of the field. At first glance, it looked like it was just sleeping, but when I got closer, I saw the 2 holes. Perfect circles, about 1 inch apart, right where the neck met the shoulder. The animal looked empty, like someone had drained all the life out of it. I knelt down and examined the wounds. No tearing, no ragged edges. They were clean, almost surgical. The grass around the cow was undisturbed. Whatever did this had been very careful. "Any tracks?" I asked Bill. He shook his head. "That's the strangest part. I checked everywhere. Nothing. It's like the thing flew in and flew out." I took pictures and collected some samples, though I wasn't sure what I was looking for. In my 9 years as a ranger, I'd seen bears tear apart livestock, and I'd seen what wild dogs could do. This was neither. Over the next few days, more calls came in. Same thing every time. Dead animals, drained of blood, no evidence of what killed them. The local paper started running stories about a vampire beast, which made me angry. People were scared enough without newspapers making things worse. Column I spent my time driving between farms, taking notes, trying to find some pattern. The attacks were happening in a rough circle around Looking Glass Rock, one of the highest peaks in our district. All the farms were within 10 miles of the forest boundary. Whatever was doing this was coming out of my woods. The farmers started forming groups, carrying guns when they went out to check their animals. Some talked about hunting parties, going into the forest to track down whatever was killing their livestock. I couldn't let that happen. Too many people would get hurt, probably for nothing. I was sure it had to be an animal, some kind of predator that was sick or injured. Maybe it had rabies and couldn't hunt normally. The blood-draining part didn't make sense, but I'd seen sick animals do strange things before. Presume that's what I told myself anyway. I was a ranger, not some superstitious mountain person who believed in monsters. There had to be a reasonable explanation. At night, lying in my small cabin on the edge of the forest, I could hear things moving in the darkness outside. Things that didn't sound like any animal I knew. And sometimes, when I was out on patrol during the day, I'd get the feeling that something was watching me from the deep woods. I just didn't know how right I was. The first person to actually see the thing was Tommy McLeod, a 12-year-old boy whose family was camping at Davidson River. Tommy's dad brought him to my office 3 days after the latest livestock attack. "Tell her what you told me, son," his father said, putting a hand on the boy's shoulder. Tommy was pale and shaking. He kept looking toward the window like he expected something to come crashing through. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I was getting water from the stream," he said. "It was early, just after sunrise. I heard this sound behind me like someone breathing real heavy. When I turned around, there was this thing watching me from the trees." "What did it look like?" I asked gently. "It was standing on 2 legs, but it wasn't a person. It was about as tall as me, maybe a little bigger, grey skin like a lizard. It had these spikes running down its back, and its eyes—" Tommy stopped and shuddered. "Its eyes were red and glowing. It stared right at me and I couldn't move, couldn't even scream. I just stood there while it looked at me." "How long did this last?" I asked. "I don't know, maybe a minute? Then it just turned around and walked back into the woods, real fast like it was floating." Tommy's dad looked at me with worried eyes. "He won't sleep without the lights on. Keeps saying the thing is coming back for him." I took down all the details and drove out to their campsite. The stream ran clear and cold from the mountains, surrounded by thick rhododendron bushes. I found some broken branches where something had pushed through, but no footprints. The ground was too hard and rocky. But there was something else. On one of the broken branches, I found a small amount of clear, sticky substance. It smelled strange, not like anything I'd encountered in the woods before. I put it in a sample bag and made a note to have it tested. Afternoon, a man in a dark suit showed up at my office. He was tall and thin, with grey hair and cold blue eyes. He showed me a badge that said CDC, Centers for Disease Control. "I'm Dr. James Whitfield," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I understand you've been investigating some unusual animal deaths in this area." "That's right," I said. "Livestock attacks. We think it might be a sick predator." Dr. Whitfield nodded slowly. "We're concerned about a potential disease vector, some kind of rabies variant that might be affecting local wildlife. I'll be setting up a research station to monitor the situation." Unprotected. Something about him made me uncomfortable. He seemed to know more about the attacks than I'd told him. And why would the CDC be interested in a few dead cows? "I'd like to coordinate with your investigation," he continued. "Share information, pool resources." Dr. Whitfield left me his card and said he'd be in touch. After he was gone, I realized I felt like I'd just been interviewed instead of consulted. That night, I decided to stake out Henderson's farm. If whatever was killing the livestock was going to strike again, it would probably come back to the same area. I parked my truck in the woods about a quarter-mile away and hiked to a spot overlooking the pasture. I brought my infrared scope and a motion detector, plus my rifle, just in case. The night was clear and hot. Crickets chirped in the grass, and occasionally I heard an owl calling from the forest. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds. I started to think I was wasting my time. Meticulously. Then, around 2 in the morning, the crickets stopped. The silence was sudden and complete. Even the breeze seemed to die away. I picked up my scope and scanned the pasture, looking for any movement. At first I saw nothing. Then something moved near the fence line. Something that didn't look right. Through the infrared scope, I could see a heat signature moving across the field. But it wasn't moving like any animal I knew. It seemed to flow from one spot to another,
faster than anything should be able to move. And it was walking upright. I watched it approach one of Henderson's cows. The animal didn't seem afraid. It just stood there while the thing got closer. When they were about 10 feet apart, the cow simply laid down in the grass, like it was going to sleep. The creature moved to the cow and bent over it. I couldn't see exactly what it was doing, but it stayed there for several minutes. When it finally straightened up, the cow didn't move. Then the thing looked directly at me. Even through the scope, even from a quarter-mile away, I could see its eyes, red and glowing, just like Tommy had said. And I had the strangest feeling that it could see me too, despite the darkness and the distance. It stared at me for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then it turned and moved toward the forest, covering the distance impossibly fast. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. I sat until dawn, shaking. When the sun came up, I walked down to check on the cow. Dead, with 2 perfect holes in its neck, just like all the others. But now I knew we weren't dealing with any ordinary animal. Dr. Whitfield was waiting for me when I got back to the office that morning. He had coffee and donuts from the bakery in town, and he was reading through my case files like he owned the place. "Find anything interesting last night?" he asked, not looking up from the papers. I hadn't told him about my stakeout plan. "How did you—" "I have ways of keeping track of the situation," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "Margaret, I think it's time I told you what we're really dealing with here." He closed the file and leaned back in his chair. 3 weeks ago, there was a break-in at a classified research facility about 50 miles from here. Several specimens were stolen.
We believe they've made their way into these mountains. Specimens of what? Imprisoned Dr. Whitfield was quiet for a long moment. Genetically modified organisms, created for specialized applications. They're extremely dangerous, and they need to be recovered immediately. You're talking about the things that are killing livestock? Yes, and if we don't find them soon, they'll start killing people. I stared at him. You're telling me the government created these creatures? The details are classified. What matters now is containment. I need your help to track them down before this situation gets out of control. I wanted to arrest him on the spot. These things, whatever they were, had been terrorizing local farmers for weeks, and he'd known about it the whole time. But I also knew that if he was telling the truth, we were dealing with something far more dangerous than I'd imagined. "How many of them are there?" I asked. "We think 3 escaped, but they breed quickly under the right conditions." Before I could ask what that meant, the phone rang. It was Joseph Standing Bear, an elder from the Cherokee community near the reservation. Joseph and I had worked together before on cultural site protection issues. "Margaret," his voice was tight with worry, "can you come out to my place? There's something I need to show you." I was sitting in Joseph's kitchen while he poured sweet tea and told me about his grandfather's stories. In the 1920s, my grandfather and some other hunters encountered creatures like what you're describing, Joseph said. They called them blood drinkers, said they came from the deep caves in the mountains. "Joseph, these things aren't from any caves. They're—" I stopped, glancing at Dr. Whitfield, who had insisted on coming along. "I know what the government man told you," Joseph said quietly. "But my grandfather's stories described the same creatures. 4 feet tall, grey skin, red eyes. They hunted in packs and could drain the life from animals without leaving a mark." "How did your grandfather's hunters deal with them?" Dr. Whitfield asked. Joseph looked at him for a long moment. "There are old ways, spiritual ways, but they require sacrifice." That afternoon we got reports of 3 more attacks. Not just livestock this time. A family camping near Looking Glass Rock had been found dead in their tent. The parents were drained like the animals, but the 2 children were missing. I organized search parties to look for the kids, but something told me we wouldn't find them alive. When Dr. Whitfield showed up with a military team carrying tranquilizer equipment, I realized this had gone way beyond my authority as a park ranger. The search teams found tracks this time. Not human, not animal. 4-toed prints with claw marks, leading toward a series of old mine shafts on the north face of Looking Glass Rock. Dr. Whitfield said, studying the maps, "We'll go in at first light." "What about the children?" I asked. He didn't answer, but his expression told me everything I needed to know. That night, Joseph came to my cabin. He brought a leather pouch filled with herbs and small carved bones. "Those creatures alive," he said. "Whatever they were created for, it's nothing good. And if they're breeding..." He shook his head. "My grandfather said the blood drinkers would call to each other across great distances. If word gets back to wherever they came from, more will come." "What are you suggesting?" "There's a ritual, a way to bind them to one place permanently, but it requires someone to stay behind and complete the binding." I looked at the herbs and bones in his weathered hands. A week ago, I would have laughed at the idea of using Cherokee magic to fight government-created monsters. Now it seemed like our best option. "Disappointment?" I asked. Joseph nodded. "I lay in bed that night, listening to the sounds outside my cabin. I tried to prepare myself for what we might find in those mine shafts, but nothing could have prepared me for what was actually waiting in the darkness, underground. We went into the mine shafts at dawn, me, Joseph, Dr. Whitfield, and 4 soldiers with enough firepower to take down a bear. The main entrance was about 50 feet up the rocky face of Looking Glass Rock, hidden behind a tangle of dead trees and broken stone. Joseph led the way, carrying a backpack full of what he called blessed weapons, knives and arrows that had been prepared according to old Cherokee traditions. I had my rifle and a powerful flashlight. The soldiers carried tranquilizer guns and nets. Disappointment, Ted, hit us first. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Part animal musk, part something sweet and rotten. The tunnel sloped downward into absolute darkness, and our footsteps echoed weirdly off the stone walls. About 100 feet in, we found the children's bodies. They'd been used somehow, drained completely, but arranged carefully in a circle around what looked like a nest made of bones and torn fabric. I'd seen death before, but this was different. This was evil. Dr. Whitfield examined the area with scientific detachment. "They're using the children to feed the young," he said quietly. "This confirms they're reproducing." Knelt by the bodies and began whispering in Cherokee, sprinkling herbs from his pouch. The soldiers looked nervous, checking their weapons and scanning the darkness beyond our lights. That's when we heard the sound. It started as a low humming, almost below human hearing. Then it grew louder and higher, until it became a wailing that seemed to come from the rock itself. The soldiers raised their weapons, and I gripped my rifle tighter. "They know we're here," Joseph said, standing up from the children's bodies. "They're calling the pack." Turbulence, the attack came from 3 directions at once. Commemorate, the creatures moved faster than anything had a right to move. Grey shapes flowing through the darkness, red eyes gleaming in our flashlight beams. The first soldier got his tranquilizer gun up and fired, but the dart bounced off the creature's hide like it hit armor. On him, I saw claws and teeth and heard screaming. Blood splashed across the mine walls. I fired my rifle at the nearest creature and hit its center mass. The bullet spun it around, but it didn't go down. Instead, it turned toward me with those terrible glowing eyes, and I felt the same freezing paralysis that Tommy McLeod had described. Joseph shouted something in Cherokee and threw a handful of his herbs at the creature. Where the herbs touched its skin, smoke rose and the thing shrieked in pain. The paralysis broke, and I could move again. The battle lasted maybe 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. 2 more soldiers died before we managed to drive the creatures deeper into the mine. Dr. Whitfield took a claw across his face and was bleeding badly, but he refused to retreat. "We have to get to the main nest," he kept saying. "We have to capture the breeding female." The tunnel opened into a large cavern, about 200 feet underground. Our lights revealed dozens of eggs clustered along the walls, and 3 more adult creatures guarding them. But the thing in the center of the cavern was different. Larger, with spikes along its arms and back, and intelligence in its red eyes that made my blood turn cold. The queen, or alpha female, or whatever it was. When it saw us, It let out a sound that was part roar and part something that might have been laughter. Joseph stepped forward, pulling objects from his backpack. "Now," he said to me, "before they can coordinate an attack." What happened next still gives me nightmares. Logically began chanting in Cherokee while arranging carved stones in a pattern around the cavern entrance. The creatures reacted immediately, rushing toward us in a coordinated assault. But something was wrong with their movements. They seemed to be fighting against invisible barriers. "The binding ritual," Joseph explained between verses of his chant. "But it requires a life to complete." "What do you mean?" I shouted, firing at the alpha female as she tried to break through whatever spiritual barrier Joseph was creating. "Someone has to stay behind to finish the binding. Someone has to die here for it to work permanently." Dr. Whitfield appeared beside us, his face covered in blood, but his eyes bright with an intensity that scared me. "We can't let them die," he said. "Do you understand what we could learn from these specimens? What they could be worth?" That's when I realized Dr. Whitfield hadn't come here to destroy the creatures. He'd come to steal them for himself. Joseph looked at me with sad, tired eyes. "I'm 73 years old, Margaret. I've lived a good life. You have many years ahead of you, and people will need someone who understands these things." Before I could stop him, he stepped into the center of the cavern. The creatures swarmed him immediately, but as they touched him, light seemed to pour from his body, and the chanting grew louder, even though his mouth was no longer moving. The alpha female let out a sound of rage and fear, and the other creatures began fleeing deeper into the mine. The last thing I saw before the cave entrance collapsed was Joseph's body surrounded by light, and the queen creature trapped beside him as tons of rock crashed down from the ceiling. Dr. Whitfield was screaming about his specimens, but I grabbed him and the surviving soldier and ran. We barely made it out before the entire mine system caved in. When the dust settled, Looking Glass Rock was changed forever.
Where the mine entrance had been, there was only solid stone. And somewhere underneath all that rock, the creatures were sealed away with Joseph Standing Bear's spirit standing guard. The government cleanup team arrived 6 hours later. Dr. Whitfield and the soldier who survived were taken away in a black helicopter. I never saw either of them again. The official report said Dr. Whitfield died in a laboratory accident the following week. The cover story was simple and effective. A rabid pack of coyotes had been responsible for the livestock deaths and the camping family's tragedy. The mine collapse was attributed to geological instability from the drought. The children's bodies were found and returned to their families for burial. End of story. It wasn't the end. Not for me. 3 days after the mine collapsed, I started having dreams. Visions, really. I could see things in the forest that weren't visible to normal sight. I could sense when animals were afraid or when something unnatural was moving through the woods. Joseph's spirit would visit me sometimes, especially when I was walking the mountain trails alone. He told me the binding would hold, but that other facilities were creating other creatures. And someday, someone would need to know how to fight them. I spent the next few years documenting everything that happened, writing it down in coded journals that I keep hidden in my cabin. I also learned as much as I could about Cherokee spiritual traditions, working with Joseph's family to understand the old ways of fighting supernatural threats. Other incidents happened across the southeast. Always the same pattern: genetic experiments escaping containment, government cleanup teams, cover stories. I started hearing from other park rangers, Forest Service people, local law enforcement. People who had encountered things they couldn't explain or report through official channels. We developed an informal network, warning systems, emergency protocols, ways to recognize when something unnatural was loose in the wilderness. The mine under Looking Glass Rock has stayed quiet for 30 years now, but sometimes, when I'm hiking near that area, I can feel something stirring deep underground. The binding is holding, but it's not permanent. Nothing ever is. I'm 55 years old now, and I've trained 3 other rangers to take over when I'm gone. I've taught them what Joseph taught me about the old ways, and I've made sure they understand what kind of world we're really living in. Because the government never stopped making their creatures, they just got better at containing them, most of the time.
Wearable reading this, and you live in the mountains of North Carolina, here's what you need to know. Stay away from abandoned mine shafts. Don't camp alone in areas where livestock have been found dead. If you see something that walks upright but isn't human, don't look directly into its eyes. And if you ever meet a park ranger who seems to know more than they should about things that go bump in the night, listen to them. We're the ones standing between you and the darkness. My name is Margaret Stormcrow, and I'm likely just working with the Voes of World, but I'm not going to with these no money, and I'm certainly that you of the first creature of Lars. My name is Margaret Stormcrow, and I'm net the shorts more than Shiv before. No longer them from standing in the room, of course what the world happened. My name is Margaret Stormcrow, and I'm finding between you and stay away from the park ranger who seems degenerated. My name is Margaret Storm, and I'm navigate to run the darkness, which work them workshly and nothing listen, provides here the world was retrograde. With you feeling the bod of the area, if you also have it is world, pretty much deep away, but more than the park ranger, continue enshall accessed that recently know. Within you're given to a few improving, but the definitely looking for the more, but if you complete the idea, remain be price. My name is Margaret Storm, and I'm understand their well with weld. Just describe the work I was well, but if you also want to most kind of things that just not to look at, when you need, mean to me, you can already trying to explore, together than the darkness. I've Mary Stormcrow, and I'm still standing guard. The mountains remember everything, and some secrets are too dangerous to die with the people who know them. But I won't be around forever. Someone else will have to take up the watch. I just hope they're ready when the time comes.